She came from an unknown place, carrying a name, a tattered suitcase, and the promise of a dead man. When Evelyn Cross stepped out of the carriage in the desolate town of Red Hollow, what awaited her was not her fiancé, but the pitying gazes of a crowd of strangers, a penniless woman, homeless, with no one waiting for her. But instead of collapsing, she looked up at the barren sky and made the most daring decision of her life. Like and comment with the name of the city you're viewing from. Let me know how far this story has come. The stagecoach rolled into Red Hollow just past 2 in the afternoon, trailing a long plume of dust that settled slowly over the main street like ash after a fire. Evelyn Cross sat in the far corner of the cab, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight in a way that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with habit. She had learned early that if you looked composed, people sometimes believed you were. She was not composed. Her heart had been hammering since dawn, since the coach had crested the last ridge and she'd caught her first glimpse of the town below. Smaller than she'd imagined, raw, the buildings sitting against the landscape like they hadn't fully decided to stay. She'd told herself the nerves were natural. Any woman would be nervous, riding to meet the man she'd agreed to marry through a series of letters stretched across 4 months. Any woman would be. But the nerves had a different texture now, something she couldn't name. The coach lurched to a stop in front of the Holloway dry goods, and the driver called down from his seat that they'd arrived. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and a heavy-set woman with a hat piled with artificial flowers, gathered their things and stepped out without ceremony. Evelyn waited until they'd gone, then smoothed her skirt, picked up her traveling bag, and descended the iron step into the afternoon heat. Red Hollow. In July was brutal. The sun came at you sideways and from above simultaneously, and the air tasted of dry earth and horse and something metallic she couldn't identify. She stood on the boardwalk and looked up and down the street, expecting to see a man she recognized from the small photograph he'd sent. Medium height, dark hair going gray at the temples, the kind of face that looked like it spent most of its time squinting. No one was waiting. She checked the time on the small watch pinned to her shirtwaist. The coach was 12 minutes early, that was all. He'd be along. She waited. The street moved around her, a pair of boys chasing a dog, a woman shaking a rug from a second-floor window, 2 men in front of the barber shop having a conversation that looked more like an argument. Evelyn watched all of it without really seeing any of it. Her bag was starting to feel heavier than it was. 20 minutes passed, then 30. She went into the dry goods store and asked if anyone knew a man named Harold Fitch, if perhaps he'd left a message for a Miss Cross arriving on the afternoon coach. The woman behind the counter, stout, gray-haired, with the careful expression of someone who chose her words slowly, set down the bolt of fabric she was measuring and looked at Evelyn for a moment before she spoke. "Harold Fitch," she said. "From over on the Birch Creek Road?" "That's right," Evelyn said. "He wrote that he'd meet me at the coach stop. I may have the date wrong." "Honey," the woman's voice dropped a register. "Harold Fitch has been dead going on 6 weeks." The store went very quiet. Or maybe the quiet was only inside Evelyn's head, some mechanism shutting down to prevent the rest of her from doing the same. "I'm sorry," she said, though she had heard perfectly. "Fever took him in early June. It moved fast. He was gone in less than a week." The woman paused. Did he not tell his family to write to you?" "He had no family." Evelyn's voice was strange to her own ears, level, careful. "He mentioned that in his letters. He said there was no one else." The woman looked at her with an expression Evelyn recognized and despised. Pity layered under politeness, the specific way people looked at someone whose situation they were grateful not to be in themselves. "I'm so sorry," the woman said. "I truly am. Do you have people here? Someone you can—" "No." Evelyn picked up her bag. "Thank you for telling me." She walked back out into the heat. For a few minutes, she simply stood on the boardwalk and let the reality settle. Harold Fitch was dead. He had been dead for 6 weeks, and no one had found a way to tell her, and she had spent the last 2 days on a stagecoach riding toward a man who no longer existed, with $14 in her purse, a bag of clothes, and a few books, and nowhere to go. She had left everything in Cincinnati, the small room she'd rented since her mother died, the position she'd held at a tailor's shop for 3 years, the careful and mostly friendless life she'd been living since she was 22. She had given her notice, sold the furniture that was hers, and packed everything she owned into one bag because Harold Fitch had written her kind letters and described a ranch with good land and a need for a capable woman, and she had decided that kind letters and good land were enough to build something on. She was 29 years old. She had been reasonable and careful her entire life, and it had not saved her from this. Across the street, a man came out of the livery stable with a little girl of about 5 or 6 clinging to his hand. The girl was limping badly, her face screwed up with the effort of not crying, and she was losing the fight. Tears were making tracks through the dust on her cheeks. The man crouched down beside her, and Evelyn could see from where she stood that he was trying to examine the child's foot without knowing entirely what he was looking for. He looked frustrated. The girl looked miserable. Evelyn watched them for a moment without thinking about it. Then she crossed the street. She knew before she got close that the little girl had something in her foot. The way she was keeping weight off the outer edge told you that much. When Evelyn crouched down on the other side of the child, the man looked up with an expression somewhere between suspicion and exhaustion. He was probably 35, maybe a year or two older. Sun-weathered, with dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. He was not unfriendly, but he was not particularly open either. He looked like a man who had stopped expecting strangers to be helpful. "May I?" Evelyn said, and nodded at the girl's foot without waiting for an answer she wasn't sure he'd give. The girl watched her with large, wet eyes. "It hurts," she said, as if Evelyn might not have noticed. "I know," Evelyn said. "Can you sit down for just a minute? Right here on the ground. It's all right." The girl looked up at the man for permission. He hesitated, then gave a short nod. They all three sat down on the street in front of the livery stable, which Evelyn supposed was an odd picture, but she was past caring about odd pictures. She carefully removed the girl's boot and found what she expected. A wood splinter the length of her thumbnail buried just below the ball of the foot, with a second smaller piece beside it. "Do you have a knife?" she said to the man. "A small one, if you've got it. And something clean. A handkerchief. Anything." He produced a folding knife from his vest pocket and a handkerchief that had been white at some point in its life. Evelyn accepted both without comment. She worked quickly and carefully, talking to the girl the whole time. Not about the foot, just talking. Asking her name, Lily. Asking if she liked horses. She did, very much. Asking what color horse she liked best. Gray, because they looked like clouds. By the time Evelyn had both splinters out and the small wounds pressed clean, Lily had forgotten to cry. "There," Evelyn said. She wrapped the handkerchief loosely around the foot. "It'll be tender for a day or two, but it's clean. Keep it covered tonight." She started to stand. The man was watching her with that same guarded expression, but something in it had shifted slightly. "You a doctor?" he said. "No." She brushed the dust from her skirt. "I grew up with brothers. You learn." He nodded once, slowly. "Thank you." "Papa," Lily said, pulling on the man's sleeve. "She has a sad face." The man looked briefly pained. "Lily, it's all right," Evelyn said. She looked at the girl and managed something close to a real smile. "My name is Evelyn. I've had a difficult afternoon is all." "Why?" Lily asked, with the directness that children deployed without any awareness of its power. "I came to meet someone," Evelyn said, "and he wasn't there." Lily absorbed this. "That's very sad," she said seriously. "It is," Evelyn agreed. The man stood up and lifted Lily onto his hip in a single practiced motion. He looked at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "Cole Dawson," he said. It took her a moment to realize he was introducing himself. "Evelyn Cross," she said. A pause opened between them. He was about to turn and go. She could see it in the shift of his weight, and she felt something sharp and practical cut through the fog that had been sitting over her since the dry goods store. It was not desperation exactly, it was closer to clarity. The kind that comes when you've run out of other options, and the only thing left is honesty. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "I don't know anyone in this town. I arrived this afternoon to meet my intended and found that he passed away 6 weeks ago. I have $14 and a bag of clothes. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking if you know anyone who needs a housekeeper, a cook, a hand with livestock, anything at all. I can work. I learn quickly and I don't complain." He stared at her. I'm telling you the truth, she said, because his expression made her feel she needed to say it. I have no reason to lie to you. My situation is exactly as bad as it sounds. Cole Dawson was quiet for a long moment. Lily was watching him with the expectant patience of a child who has learned that her father's silences are where his real decisions happen. I don't need hired help, he said finally. All right, Evelyn said. Do you know anyone who does? Another pause. He shifted Lily's weight on his hip. Come get something to eat, he said, not looking at her. You look like you haven't eaten since morning. It was not a yes, but it was not a no either, and in that moment it was more than she had. Thank you, she said. Usham. They went to a small restaurant on the far end of the main street, 3 tables covered in oilcloth, a woman cooking in the back who never came out. Cole ordered food without consulting a menu, which told Evelyn he came here often enough that there wasn't any point. Lily sat beside him and leaned against his arm in the easy, unconscious way of children who have always been allowed to do so. Evelyn ate. She was hungry enough that she had to think about eating slowly. Cole watched her in the way of a man who is trying to assess something without appearing to. He had the quality, she noticed it quickly, of being uncomfortable with silences but too guarded to fill them himself. She didn't try to help him with it. She had things of her own to think through. What she was thinking through was this. She had $14, which was enough for perhaps a week in even the cheapest accommodations if she was careful. She could take the return coach to the nearest large town. She'd pass through Salida, which had seemed big enough to have some kind of work available. A laundress, maybe. A cook for one of the hotels. She was not above either. She was also thinking about the child beside Cole Dawson, the way Lily leaned into him with such uncomplicated trust, and the way he received it with a kind of mechanical steadiness that looked more like endurance than ease. The house that child was going home to. She could tell something about it from watching the two of them. She could tell it was a house that was running on its last reserves of something. You said your intended died 6 weeks ago, Cole said. He was looking at his coffee cup. That's what the woman in the dry goods store told me. You hadn't met him? We corresponded. He placed a notice in a Cincinnati paper. I answered it. She met his eyes when he finally looked up. I know how it sounds. I'm not romantic about it. I was practical about it. I had a small life in a city, and he described something that seemed like it might be better. I was wrong, evidently. He didn't react to that in any particular way, which she appreciated. She had been half-braced for some comment about the foolishness of answering letters from strangers. Where will you go? He said. I'm not certain yet. Lily had been tearing her biscuit into small pieces and arranging them into a pattern on the oilcloth. Without looking up, she said, She could come to our house. Lily, Cole said. She fixed my foot, Lily said, still focused on her biscuit pieces. She was nice about it. Some people aren't nice about things when it hurts. The silence that followed this observation had a different quality than the ones before it. Cole looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then he looked out the window at the street, and then he looked at his hands on the table. Evelyn did not say anything. She had learned in the last few hours that her best tool in any situation was patience. The house is a mess, Cole said finally, to no one in particular. It's been... He stopped. Started again. My wife passed 8 months ago. I've been managing the ranch on my own, and the house has... Another stop. It's not fit for company. I'm not company, Evelyn said. He looked at her. I'm a woman looking for work, she said. If the house needs attention, that's work. I'm not afraid of a mess, and I don't require things to be comfortable. I can't pay you much. Room and board is a start. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked out the window again. She could see him turning it over, examining it from different angles, looking for the part of the arrangement that would come back to hurt him. She understood the instinct. She had the same one herself. 1 week, he said. We'll see how it goes. Fair enough, Evelyn said. Dina. The Dawson Ranch sat about 4 miles outside of town, up a road that was more of a suggestion than an actual road. 2 wheel-worn tracks through dry grass with a line of sparse cottonwoods following the creek on the left side. The wagon ride out was mostly silent. Lily fell asleep between them, her head eventually finding Evelyn's arm as a pillow in the unselfconscious way she seemed to approach most things. Cole drove with his eyes on the trail ahead, and his jaw set in a way that suggested he was already second-guessing himself. Evelyn led him. She was looking at the land around them, the way the hills rolled away to the west, the shape of the creek, the quality of the grass, which was dry but not dead. There was something here. You could see it if you were looking for it. The house, when they arrived, was a low-slung structure of weathered timber with a porch that listed slightly to the left and a kitchen garden that had gone to seed and weeds. There was a barn out back, solid-looking, and a corral with 3 horses that came to the fence when the wagon pulled in. One of them, a gray mare, pressed her nose over the top rail and whuffled loudly. "That's Sage," Lily said, having woken up without Evelyn noticing. "She was Mama's." "She's beautiful," Evelyn said. "Papa doesn't ride her," Lily said. "He says it's because she's difficult, but I think it's because it makes him sad." Cole got down from the wagon without comment. What? The inside of the house was, as Cole had warned, not in good order. But it was not the disorder of people who didn't care. It was the disorder of people who had run out of time and energy, which was a different thing entirely. There were dishes on the drying rack that had never been put away, a coat hanging on the back of a chair for so long it had become invisible, dust that had settled into corners and been left there because there was always something more urgent. The parlor had a woman's touch buried under the neglect. A curtain with embroidery at the hem, a small rug with a pattern of leaves, a photograph on the mantelpiece that Evelyn did not look at directly. She put her bag down in the room Cole showed her, small, plain, with a window that looked out over the creek, and went back to the kitchen. "Is there a broom?" she said. Cole was standing in the doorway of the kitchen looking at her with that guarded expression she was beginning to catalog. "Beside the door," he said. She found it. She started sweeping. Basim. It took her 2 days to understand the shape of what the house needed, and another 3 to begin making real progress on it. She was careful not to move things that might matter. The photograph on the mantelpiece, the embroidered curtain, the small items that still held the dead woman's fingerprints, metaphorically speaking. Those she dusted around with deliberate gentleness. Everything else she organized, cleaned, replaced, or discarded as needed. Cole watched this with the wariness of a man who expects to find something missing. He came in at the end of the second day and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the swept floor and the clean surfaces and the pot of soup on the stove, and something in his face did something complicated that he controlled before it became anything readable. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "This is what you hired me for," Evelyn said. She was chopping carrots. She didn't look up. "I said room and board. I didn't specify Mr. Dawson." She set down the knife and looked at him. "I need to be useful. It's not about obligation. Being useful is how I stay sane." He seemed unsure how to respond to that. Lily, appearing from behind him like a small shadow, said, "The soup smells like the kind Mama used to make." The kitchen went quiet. Evelyn looked at the girl who was looking at the pot on the stove with an expression that was hard to describe, wistful and hungry, and something older than 5 years old should have to carry. "What kind did your mama make?" Evelyn said, careful. "With the little yellow things," Lily said. "I don't know what they're called." "Turnips?" Lily scrunched her face. "Maybe. She put pepper in too." "Then I'll add pepper," Evelyn said. When she looked up, Cole had gone. The week he'd promised came and went without either of them mentioning it. What Evelyn learned in those first weeks was the particular texture of the loneliness that had settled into that ranch. It was not the acute kind, not the sharp grief of something freshly lost, but the chronic kind, the kind that had been there long enough to become structural, like dry rot working through the walls. Cole Dawson functioned. He got up before dawn and worked until it was dark, and ate whatever food was in front of him and fell asleep in the chair in the parlor more nights than not, too tired to make it to his bed. He talked to Lily with a steadiness that clearly cost him something. He talked to Evelyn when it was practical, about the house, the livestock, what supplies were needed in town. He did not talk about his wife. He did not talk about himself. He was not unkind, but he had built something between himself and the rest of the world that was hard to see around. Evelyn respected it. She had her own walls. She simply noted where his were and didn't push. What she did do was cook meals that were actual meals rather than whatever could be found and eaten cold, and keep the house in order and spend time with Lily in the evenings, reading to her, listening to her, letting the child talk about her mother in the simple, matter-of-fact way children talked about things they were still making sense of. Lily had a quality Evelyn liked immediately. She said exactly what she thought. There was no performance to her. What you saw was what was there. "Do you think my papa is sad?" Lily asked one evening. They were on the porch, Lily in Evelyn's lap, even though she was arguably too old for it, both of them watching the sun go down behind the western hills. "I think your papa carries a lot," Evelyn said. "Is it the same as sad?" Evelyn thought about it. Maybe it's what sad turns into when it doesn't have anywhere to go. Lily was quiet for a moment. "I try to make him laugh," she said. "Sometimes it works." "I bet it does," Evelyn said. "He laughed last night," Lily said, with the specific satisfaction of someone reporting important data. "When I told him the rooster got into the kitchen and sat on your hat." "That was genuinely funny," Evelyn said, even though at the time she'd been too annoyed to appreciate it. Lily giggled. Then, in that way children had of switching tracks without warning. "Are you going to stay?" Evelyn looked at the darkening hills. "I don't know," she said. "That's up to your father. He doesn't always know what he wants," Lily said, as though this were a well-established fact requiring no particular emphasis. Cole Dawson found her on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after she'd arrived, sitting at the kitchen table before dawn with a cup of coffee and the ranch's account ledger open in front of her. She had not been snooping. The ledger had been sitting on the table when she came down, and she had glanced at it the way you glanced at anything left open in front of you, and what she'd seen had made her sit down and look more carefully. She heard his boots on the stairs and didn't close the ledger. Hiding it would have been worse. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he saw her. "I wasn't prying," she said. It was on the table. He looked at the ledger, then at her. His jaw tightened. "You looked at it," he said. Not accusing exactly, but close. "I did. I'm sorry, but I have to ask you something." She kept her voice level. "The sum on the back page, the one marked Granger Holdings. What is that?" Something moved through his expression. Something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear, but had elements of both. "That's not your business," he said. "Maybe not." Evelyn folded her hands on top of the ledger. "But I've kept books before, Mr. Dawson. I worked for a tailor in Cincinnati for 3 years, and I kept all his accounts. That number doesn't look like a mortgage payment. It looks like something else." He crossed to the stove and poured coffee without saying anything. The silence was the kind that had information inside it. She waited. "Victor Granger," Cole said finally, "owns half of what's worth owning in this county. He's been after my water rights for 2 years. He made an offer on the ranch. I said no." He turned around, leaning against the counter. "The number in the ledger is what he says I owe him from a loan agreement my father signed 20 years ago, that I never knew about until Granger showed me the paper 6 months ago." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "Do you believe the paper is legitimate?" "I don't know." The honesty of it seemed to cost him. "My father is dead. There's no one to ask. Have you had a lawyer look at it?" "The lawyer in Red Hollow does work for Granger. There are other towns with lawyers." "I know that." His voice had an edge. Not at her, she thought, at the situation. "It takes money to fight things in court. It takes time. I'm one man running a ranch with a 5-year-old daughter, and I'm trying to—" He stopped, set his jaw. "I'm trying to keep things together." "I know," Evelyn said. The edge went out of his voice. He looked at his coffee cup. "I shouldn't have snapped," he said. "You didn't, really." She stood up and moved to the stove to refill her own cup. "Tell me about Granger." He looked at her as though he was still deciding whether she had any right to ask. "Tell me," she said again, quietly. "I'm here. I might as well know what I'm in the middle of." Eat. What she learned that morning at the kitchen table, Cole talking and stopping and talking again, in the halting way of someone unaccustomed to telling things, was this. Victor Granger had come to the Red Hollow area 15 years ago with money from somewhere back east and an appetite for land that hadn't diminished since. He had bought up failed ranches in dry years, foreclosed on loans when they came due at inconvenient times, and built relationships with the county officials that looked like friendship from the outside and probably weren't. He owned the largest spread in the county, controlled the water on the eastern side of the valley, and was working systematically toward the western side, which was where the Dawson Ranch sat. Cole's land had something Granger wanted specifically, a creek-fed meadow on the upper pasture that could support twice the head of cattle Granger currently ran on his own land. The meadow sat on what had been Dawson land for 30 years. Cole's father had built the place from scratch, weathered 3 bad winters and a drought, and died owing nobody anything, or so Cole had believed. The loan agreement Granger had produced was dated 1867 and bore what looked like his father's signature. It described a sum of money borrowed for land improvements, with a repayment schedule that had apparently been met in full, but with a clause, buried in the middle pages, granting Granger Holdings first right of purchase on the upper pasture if the property ever changed hands. And there was a second clause, newer looking, that Cole couldn't explain, about a debt arising from interest accrued on unpaid fees. "It doesn't sound right," Evelyn said. "No," Cole said. "It doesn't. Has anyone else seen the document? Someone who could—" The back door opened and Lily came in from the yard in her nightgown, barefoot, carrying a small frog she had clearly just caught near the creek. "Look," she said, holding it up. Both adults looked at the frog. "Very nice," Evelyn said. "Please put it back outside." "But outside, Lily," Cole said. "And put some shoes on." Lily departed with the gravity of someone being terribly wronged. The frog was released from the back step. The conversation shifted to breakfast and then to the day's work, and the ledger was closed and put away. But Evelyn thought about it all day. She thought about Victor Granger's name written in someone else's ledger. She thought about documents with buried clauses and small-town lawyers with convenient loyalties. She thought about a man trying to hold on to his father's land while running out of ways to fight. And she thought, with the practical clarity that had always been her best quality, that there were ways to fight that didn't require money or a lawyer. What they required was information, documentation. The particular kind of stubbornness that looked like patience, but was actually something sharper. She was good at that. The trouble with Victor Granger arrived in person on a Saturday afternoon in the form of a man on a black horse with 2 riders behind him. Evelyn saw them coming from the kitchen window and watched them cross the yard with the easy ownership of men who expected not to be challenged. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the front door. Cole was in the barn. He came out when he heard the horses, and Evelyn watched through the screen door as he walked across the yard to meet the man dismounting from the black horse. Victor Granger was not what she'd expected. She had pictured someone older, grayer, more obviously villainous. What she saw instead was a man of about 50, well-built and well-dressed for the county, with a wide face and the kind of easy smile that worked on people who didn't look carefully at eyes. His eyes were pale and steady and didn't change when his mouth smiled. "Dawson," he said, in the hearty tone of a man greeting someone he owned a piece of. "Got a minute?" "I've got work," Cole said. "Won't take long." Granger looked around the yard with the air of someone appraising property. His gaze moved to the house and settled, briefly, on the screen door. He couldn't see Evelyn clearly. The light was wrong, but she stepped back anyway, out of habit. "I heard you had a woman staying out here," Granger said. "A housekeeper." "That's right," Cole said. "Is that wise?" The smile stayed exactly the same. "Man, in your situation, rumors can start. People talk." "People will talk regardless," Cole said. "What do you want, Victor?" Granger looked back at the hills to the west, toward the upper pasture. "Same thing I wanted before," he said. "Just being reasonable about it. The offer stands. Better than it was, actually. I've added 10%. "No, Cole." A different tone now, still pleasant, but with something underneath it that was not. "You're a practical man. I respect that about you. Your father was a practical man. The situation with the account, I don't want to push that, but I have a legal obligation to protect my interests." "The interest on that account was paid," Cole said. "My father paid it." "The principal, yes." Granger's voice was patient, the way a teacher was patient with a student who kept making the same mistake. But the clause about accrued administrative fees, there was no such clause when that paper was signed. The document says otherwise. Then the document is wrong. Cole's voice was flat, controlled, the kind of control that had to work to stay flat. "Get off my land." Granger's 2 riders had not moved or spoken. They sat on their horses and looked at nothing in particular, which was worse than if they'd looked threatening. Granger put his hat back on with a slow, deliberate motion. "I'll give you another week to think on it," he said pleasantly. "No sense rushing a man." He swung back up onto the black horse. "That housekeeper, she a good cook?" Cole didn't answer. Granger smiled at the house, at the screen door, at the invisible woman behind it, and rode out of the yard with his two riders behind him. Cole stood in the middle of the yard for a long moment after they'd gone. Then he turned and walked to the barn and didn't come in for dinner until well past dark. Evelyn kept the food warm and said nothing about it when he finally sat down at the table. She refilled his coffee once. She let him eat. When he pushed his plate back, he said without looking at her, "I'm not selling." "I know," she said. "Whatever happens, I'm not selling." She looked at him across the table. This worn-down man with his dead wife's photograph on the mantelpiece and his dead father's land under his feet and a 5-year-old daughter asleep upstairs, and she thought, "You shouldn't have to." "Then we figure out another way," she said. He looked at her then, really looked. "We," he said. "I said we," she said. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the creek ran on in the dark, and the gray mare moved somewhere in the pasture, and the night settled over the Dawson Ranch the way it always did, indifferent, enormous, and for the moment, at least, still theirs. She wrote her first letter that night, by lamplight, at the kitchen table after Cole had gone to bed. It was addressed to a law office in Salida, the name she'd found in a 2-year-old newspaper that had been lining a kitchen drawer. She described the situation in plain terms: a loan document of uncertain legitimacy, a clause that appeared to have been added after the original signing, a land baron with county connections making a claim that didn't hold together on its face. She asked if anyone there practiced land law and what a consultation might cost. She wrote a second letter to a woman she'd known in Cincinnati, a widow who had married a man with property disputes in Kansas and had come through it knowing more about deed law than most people cared to. She asked what she remembered. She sealed both envelopes and left them on the table to take to town. Then she blew out the lamp and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the house breathe around her. She had $14 and a bag of clothes and a week's worth of work behind her. She had no stake in this land, no claim on this family, no reason to stay beyond the room and the board Cole had offered. But she thought about Lily's voice saying, "I try to make him laugh," and she thought about Cole's hands on the table in the dark kitchen, and she thought about a man who had been holding things together alone for long enough that he'd forgotten what it felt like not to. She was good at patience. She was good at documents and letters and the kind of quiet, methodical work that people underestimated because it didn't look like fighting. She was also stubborn in a way that she'd spent most of her life apologizing for, and that she was done apologizing for. She didn't know what Victor Granger was going to do next, but she was beginning to think she was going to be ready for it. The letters came back in 9 days. Evelyn had not told Cole she'd sent them. She'd taken them to town herself on a Tuesday morning when she went for flour and salt pork, tucked them into her coat pocket and handed them across the post office counter like they were nothing, like she wrote letters to lawyers in other towns every week. She had considered telling him and decided against it, not because she was hiding anything, but because she didn't want him to carry the weight of waiting. He was already carrying enough. The first reply was from the law office in Salida. A man named Theodore Marsh wrote in a careful, compact hand that he did practice land law, that the situation she'd described raised questions worth examining, and that he would be willing to review the original document at no initial charge if she could arrange to have it sent to him or could bring it in person. He noted that loan agreements from the 1860s were frequently challenged on grounds of alteration or fraud, and that clause additions made after signing were legally unenforceable if the alteration could be demonstrated. The second letter was from her friend in Cincinnati, Margaret Hollis, who wrote 3 pages in her emphatic, underlined way about deed registration and the importance of county land records, which were public documents and which anyone had the legal right to examine. Margaret had learned all of this the hard way, fighting her late husband's cousin over 40 acres of Kansas sorghum land, and she was generous with the information in the specific way of people who had bled for their knowledge. Evelyn read both letters at the kitchen table before Cole came in from the morning rounds. She read them twice. Then she folded them and put them in the inside pocket of her coat and started making breakfast. She waited until Lily had been fed and sent out to the yard before she said anything. Cole was on his second cup of coffee, still moving at the slow pace of a man whose body hadn't fully accepted that the day had started. "I wrote to a lawyer in Salida 3 weeks ago," she said, "about the Granger document." He went still in the way she was beginning to recognize. Not anger exactly, but a complete suspension of motion while something processed. "You didn't mention that," he said. "I know. I didn't want to raise it if nothing came back." She set Theodore Marsh's letter on the table in front of him. Something came back. He picked it up and read it. His expression didn't give much away. It never did. But she saw his jaw tighten and then release on a long breath. "He'd look at it for free," Cole said. "To start, yes. And if he thinks there's a case, we discuss what comes next." Cole set the letter down. "We'd have to get to Salida." "I know, it's 2 hours by coach." He looked at the letter again. "The document's here. I have it in the desk." "I know." He looked at her. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "I've been thinking about it since the morning I saw the ledger," she said. "Which you left on the table." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved across his face and disappeared before it became anything definite. "I didn't leave it for you to look at," he said. "I know, but I did anyway." He pushed back from the table and went to the window. The yard was visible from there. Lily crouched near the fence, doing something with dirt and a stick that appeared to require her complete concentration. He watched her for a moment. "If Marsh thinks the document's legitimate," Cole said, "then I owe Granger a sum I can't pay. And he takes the upper pasture." "Yes." "And if Marsh thinks it's altered, then you have grounds to challenge it, with a legal record behind you instead of just your word against Granger's." Cole was quiet. "I also got a letter from a friend in Ohio," Evelyn said. "She told me the county land records are public. Anyone can request to review them." He turned from the window. "What are you looking for in the county records?" "I want to see when the Granger Holdings claim on your upper pasture was first registered, if it was registered at all." She met his eyes. "A fraudulent clause in a private document is one thing. Fraudulent registration in public records is something else." Cole looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she resisted the urge to fill the silence. "You know about land law," he said finally. "I know how to read," she said. "And I know someone who did this herself in Kansas and won." He picked up the letter again, read it through once more, then set it down with a deliberateness that told her he'd made up his mind. "I'll get the document," he said. The document was a 2-page handwritten agreement on paper that had yellowed at the edges but was otherwise well preserved. Cole spread it on the kitchen table, and they both looked at it. The handwriting on the first page was consistent. The same pen, the same hand, the same ink color, all the way through. The signature at the bottom of page 2 looked right, but there was a third section, added below the original close, written in a hand that was close but not identical to the rest, with ink that was slightly darker, slightly less faded, as though it had been added years later. Evelyn pointed to it without touching the paper. "There," she said. Cole looked. "I saw that when Granger showed it to me. He said it was a later amendment." "Amendments have dates," Evelyn said. "This doesn't, and the ink is different." "You can see that?" "You can see it if you look." She pulled her chair closer. "The original text uses a wider pen stroke. This section at the bottom is narrower, different NIB, probably different ink mixture." She sat back. "I'm not a documents examiner. A lawyer would need a proper expert, but it's enough to ask questions." Cole folded the document back carefully. "I'll go to Salida this week," he said. "Wednesday, if you can manage the place." "Of course. Lily could stay with the Hennessy family in town. They've offered before." Evelyn nodded. She started to say something practical about packing the document safely, and then stopped because Cole was looking at the folded paper in his hands with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the controlled blankness he used for most things, but something open and tired and maybe a fraction of hope, which on his face looked almost like pain. "My father built this place in 1863, he said, to the document more than to her. "He came out here with nothing and he built it. He wasn't a man who borrowed money and forgot about it. He recorded everything." He set the paper down. "If Granger added that clause himself, he's been sitting on that document for years waiting for the right moment." "That's what I think too," Evelyn said quietly. "My father trusted people." Cole's voice was dry. Not bitter, just worn. He thought if a man gave you his word, that meant something. It should, Evelyn said, but it doesn't always. No, she said. It doesn't always. The morning light came through the kitchen window and lay across the table between them, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and it wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was just a silence that had weight to it, the way silences did when they were full of something real. Then Lily came in through the back door with dirt on her knees and an expression of extreme satisfaction and announced that she had found a very good worm, and the morning shifted back to its ordinary shape.
Keep kake.
Cole went to Salida on Wednesday and came back on Thursday evening looking like a man who'd had a long conversation he needed time to process. He sat down at the supper table and ate most of what was in front of him before he talked. Lily was already asleep. The house was quiet. Marsh thinks the addition is fraudulent, he said. He wants to have it examined by a documents man he knows in Denver. That'll cost something, but not as much as losing the pasture. That's good news, Evelyn said. Maybe. He turned his coffee cup. He also said that even if we prove the clause was added, Granger will fight it. He's got county connections. The process takes time and money we don't have much of. He looked up. Marsh asked how I was holding up financially. I told him the truth, which is that I'm not in serious trouble yet, but I'm closer to it than I'd like. What did he say? He said there might be a way to challenge the deed registration directly, which would be faster and cheaper than a full fraud case. He needs to see the county records first. Cole paused. He also said something else, about the land, about... He stopped, rearranged something in his face. He said if there's any question about clear ownership, it affects other things, like if something happened to me, the ranch's legal status would be complicated. Evelyn looked at him. For Lily, he said, her inheritance. If the ownership's contested and I'm gone, Granger could make a claim through the courts and it could take years to sort out, during which time Lily wouldn't have... He stopped again. I'm not planning to die anytime soon, but I have a 5-year-old and I can't pretend that's not a relevant consideration. No, Evelyn said, you can't. Marsh mentioned that a spouse has clearer standing in those situations, under the current statutes. He was looking at his coffee cup. He wasn't suggesting anything. He was just explaining the law. I understand, Evelyn said. The kitchen was very quiet. Cole looked up then, and his expression was the most uncomfortable she'd seen on him. The face of a man trying to say a thing he didn't know how to say and wasn't sure he should say at all. I don't have any right to ask you that, he said. Ask me what? Evelyn said, not challenging, just making him say it. He exhaled through his nose. If there were a legal arrangement between us, just for the protection it would provide, for Lily and for the property. He looked at her steadily now, discomfort and all. It wouldn't have to be anything more than that. You'd have your own room, your own life. I'd pay you fair wages on top of the arrangement. If you ever wanted to leave, we'd figure out a dissolution. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She wasn't shocked. She'd been turning the possibility over in her own head since the morning he'd mentioned Lily's inheritance, though she hadn't let herself follow the thought all the way. She was practical enough to see the shape of it. She was also honest enough to know that practical was not the only consideration here. Let me ask you something, she said. Go ahead. If I said yes, and I'm not saying yes yet, I'm saying if, would you be asking me because of the legal protections or because you've been thinking about it for other reasons that you're using the legal protections as an excuse to raise? The color that moved through his face answered the question before he did. He was not a man who blushed easily, which made it more informative. That's a direct question, he said. It is, she said. He looked at the table, then, with what appeared to be a significant effort, both, maybe? I don't know. I'm not good at this. I haven't been good at this for a long time. He looked up. Clara, my wife. We knew each other for 2 years before we married. I knew how to do it that way. I don't know how to do it like this. Like what? Evelyn said. Like a stranger coming in and being... He made a small, frustrated gesture. You fixed Lily's foot on a public street the day we met. You've been running this house for a month and you haven't complained once. You saw a problem in my ledger and wrote to a lawyer without telling me because you didn't want to get my hopes up. He shook his head. I don't know what to do with a person like that. You talk to them, Evelyn said. Like a normal person. He almost laughed. Almost. I know. I'm going to need a few days to think about it, she said. Of course. And I wanted to be honest, she said. If I say yes, I'm not going to pretend the practical reasons aren't there. They are. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't. That I haven't. She stopped, made herself say it cleanly. I'm not indifferent to you, Cole. I want to be honest about that. He looked at her. I'm also not sure what to do with that, she said. But I think honesty is better than pretending this is purely a business arrangement when it might not be. Yes, he said quietly. I think so too. Says. She thought about it for 3 days. She walked the ranch in the mornings while Cole was on the far pasture, walked the perimeter, the creek, the upper meadow that Granger wanted, and she tried to be honest with herself about what she was considering and why. She was not in love with Cole Dawson. She'd known him for 6 weeks. You couldn't be in love with someone in 6 weeks. But she was something, and that something was more than gratitude or practicality or the specific warmth she felt toward Lily, which was its own uncomplicated thing. She found herself noticing him in the way you notice people who are trying hard at something difficult. The way he worked the ranch with a kind of grim precision. The way he watched Lily when he thought no one was looking, with an expression that was all love and all exhaustion at once. She also thought about her position if she said no. She would be a housekeeper on a ranch that a powerful man was trying to take. If Granger succeeded, she'd have nothing again. $14 and a bag of clothes and somewhere else to go. That was a practical consideration, and she was not ashamed of it, but she kept coming back to the other thing, the thing that had nothing to do with practical. The morning she'd read the Salida lawyer's letter and felt something kindle in her chest that wasn't just satisfaction at the problem solving. The evening Lily had fallen asleep against her arm on the porch, and Cole had come out and seen them there and said nothing, just leaned on the porch rail with his coffee and looked at the hills, and it had felt like something, like being part of something, like the shape of a life she hadn't imagined for herself, but that her body recognized anyway, the way your hand recognized a familiar weight. On the 4th morning, she told him yes. She said it over breakfast, matter-of-factly, because she'd decided that treating it like a grand declaration would make it worse for both of them. I'll do it, she said, setting a plate in front of him. We'll be honest with each other about what it is and what it isn't, and if things change, in either direction, we talk about it. Agreed? He looked up at her. Agreed. And you tell Lily in a way she can understand. Yes. And we go to Salida together and we talk to Marsh about both things at once. The document and the other. I'll write to him today, Cole said. Lily appeared in the doorway with both shoes on the wrong feet and the expression of someone who'd been eavesdropping from the hall and was trying to look innocent. Are you going to get married? She said. Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Lily. We're thinking about it, Cole said carefully. Lily's face underwent a transformation of pure, unrestrained joy that was so immediate and unfiltered it was almost embarrassing to watch. I knew it, she said, in the voice of someone who had in fact known no such thing until approximately 40 seconds ago. I told Sage. I said Evelyn was going to stay. You told your horse? Cole said. Sage is a good listener, Lily said, and sat down at the table and helped herself to the last biscuit with the air of someone whose day had been completely made. They were married on a Friday in the office of the county clerk, just the two of them, and Lily and a clerk named Walter, who seemed mildly surprised to be conducting a ceremony, but got through it with professional adequacy. Cole's hand was warm when he took hers. He held it steadily and didn't look away when Walter asked him the required words, and Evelyn thought, whatever else this is, it is at least honest. That mattered to her more than almost anything. Lily wore a green ribbon in her hair and gave a detailed account of the proceedings to Sage that afternoon. What followed the wedding was not a honeymoon or any kind of softening of the actual work of keeping the ranch alive. The cattle needed moving to the north pasture. There was a fence line down on the eastern edge that Cole spent 2 days fixing. The water pump on the barn trough seized up and had to be taken apart and put back together in a way that covered both of them in mud and resolved nothing for half a day. Evelyn made the kitchen into a true working room, organized the pantry into something logical, and started a proper account ledger that she kept at the kitchen table where Cole could see it whenever he wanted. She wrote to Theodore Marsh again with the news of their marriage and requested that the property documentation be updated to reflect the change. Marsh wrote back promptly, noting that this significantly strengthened their legal position regarding Lily's guardianship and the property inheritance question, and that he was proceeding with the document examination. The ordinary life of the ranch settled over them in the way that work did, not comfortable exactly, but textured, real. Cole was not a man who talked much, but he talked more than he had before, in the specific way of someone who had been alone long enough to have lost the habit and was slowly recovering it. He asked her things, about Cincinnati, about her family, about what she'd wanted when she was young, in the halting, slightly awkward way of a man who was interested but kept checking himself, as though interest were a thing that needed to be rationed. She answered honestly. She told him about the tailor shop, the ledger books, the small room over a bakery where the heat came up through the floorboards in winter. She told him about her mother and her brothers, the specific loneliness of being a practical woman in a city that valued ornamental ones. She did not dramatize it. She just told him. He listened in the way she was beginning to recognize as his version of being moved, without expression, but with a quality of attention that told her every word was landing. One evening, washing dishes at the end of a long day, she asked him about Clara. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. He stopped, started differently. She laughed easily. I don't. She thought that was funny, that I was so serious. She'd do things just to get a reaction out of me. A pause. She was good with people. Everyone liked her right away. I had to work at it. He was quiet again. She knew this land better than I did by the end. She'd ride the fence line and come back and tell me exactly what needed fixing, in the right order, most important first. She sounds competent, Evelyn said. She was. He looked at his hands on the table. I miss her, but it's not sharp anymore. It's more like a room in the house where the door is closed. It's there, I know it's there, I just don't go in. That seems like a reasonable way to carry it, Evelyn said. He looked at her. Does that bother you, No, she said simply. She was real. She mattered. I wouldn't want you to pretend otherwise. He nodded slowly. He stopped. What? I was going to say you're easier than I expected. He seemed to be aware that this wasn't particularly complimentary as stated. I mean, I expected this to be harder, to have a person in the house, to be married, she said. Yes. Is it hard? He considered it seriously, the way he considered most things. No, he said. It's strange, but not hard. I'll take strange, she said. Something that was definitely a smile this time, brief, real, changing his face entirely. Came and went before she could decide what to do about it. Victor Granger came back 3 weeks after the wedding. He came alone this time, which was worse in some ways than the two riders. A man alone and without theater is a man delivering a message he's already decided on. Evelyn was in the yard when he rode in. Cole was behind the barn. She walked to the middle of the yard and waited. Granger dismounted and looked at her with the smile that didn't go to his eyes. Mrs. Dawson, he said. Mr. Granger, she said. Something flickered in his expression. She'd used his name, and he hadn't introduced himself, which meant she knew who he was and had been expecting him. He was a man who was used to having information and reading its effects on people, and her knowing his name without flinching appeared to mildly recalibrate his expectations. I heard about the wedding, he said pleasantly. Congratulations. Thank you. It's a nice thing, a man having someone to share his concerns. His eyes moved over the yard, the house, the barn, the assessing look, particularly when those concerns are substantial. Mr. Dawson's concerns are his own business, Evelyn said. And mine. Cole came around from behind the barn and crossed the yard, reading the situation in a glance. He stopped beside Evelyn in a way that was not territorial, but was definite. Granger looked between them with an expression of mild amusement that was not quite convincing. I came to let you know, he said, still in the pleasant voice, that I've retained additional legal representation in this matter. I understand you've been in contact with a lawyer in Salida. That's right, Cole said. Good. It'll make things cleaner. Granger adjusted his hat. I also want you to know that I've spoken with the county about the welfare situation. Cole went very still. The child, Granger said, casual, almost gentle. Lily. Raised on a contested property, finances uncertain, no mother. He tilted his head. Certain parties have expressed concern. A formal inquiry isn't something I'm personally pursuing, you understand. But if others were to bring it, Lily is fine, Cole said. His voice was controlled in the way that was not easy. She's healthy, she's cared for, she has 2 parents and a home. Of course, Granger said. I'm sure the county would reach the same conclusion. These things take time, though. Inquiries, examinations, stress on a small child. He looked at Evelyn. Stress on a new family. Evelyn looked back at him steadily. Her hands were still at her sides. She was very aware of the specific quality of what he was doing. Not threatening, not legally. Just placing images in their minds, a county inquiry. Lily interviewed by strangers, a process that could drag on for months while their resources drained away. We'll keep that in mind, she said. Granger put his hat back on and turned for his horse. I hope things work out for you both, he said pleasantly. I genuinely do. He rode out of the yard at a relaxed walk. Cole didn't move until the sound of hooves had faded down the road. Then he said a short, flat word under his breath that he would never have said if Lily were in earshot. He's not going to file anything, Evelyn said. He knows we have legal representation now. A county inquiry becomes part of the record. You don't know that, Cole said. No, she said, but I know he came alone. A man who's ready to file papers doesn't ride out alone to tell you about it. He sends the papers. She looked at him. He's trying to scare us. It's working, Cole said, without any particular embarrassment about admitting it. I know, she said. He's good at it. They stood in the yard in the afternoon heat, and Evelyn looked at the line of cottonwoods along the creek and thought about the way Granger's eyes had moved over the property. Not with want, exactly. With the specific look of ownership, the look of a man who had already, in his own mind, made this into something that was his. She thought about Lily telling Sage she'd known Evelyn was going to stay. She thought about Cole's hands folded on the kitchen table in the early morning light. She thought about her mother, who had spent 30 years making herself smaller to fit the space other people left for her, and who had died in a small room over a bakery in Cincinnati with nothing to show for it but the children she'd raised mostly alone. Evelyn was not her mother. Write to Marsh today, she said. Tell him about the welfare threat and ask him whether Granger has the standing to initiate anything like that and on what grounds. Get that on the record. Cole looked at her. Today, she said. Before the week's out. He nodded slowly. All right, he said. Today. She went back inside. Through the kitchen window, she could see Lily in the yard, crouched in the dirt, doing something with sticks that appeared to be architecture of some kind. Small and absorbed and entirely unaware of the machinery turning around her life. Evelyn filled the kettle and put it on the stove. She was thinking about county land records. She was thinking about a database of deed registrations that were available to any member of the public who asked for them. She was thinking about the specific date on which Granger Holdings had first registered any interest in Cole Dawson's upper pasture, and whether that date aligned with the date on the original loan document, or whether it aligned instead with a date several years later, when an addition had been made to a 2-page agreement in slightly darker ink. She was also thinking about the other ranching families in the valley, the ones Cole had mentioned in passing, the Bellamy family to the north, the Hendersons east of town, the widow Crane who ran sheep on the lower flats, people who had been living under Granger's reach for years, who had their own small grievances, their own unprovable suspicions about how he operated. There was something in numbers. There was something in people who had the same story, told separately, adding up to a pattern that one story alone couldn't make. She had been thinking about this for a while. She had not told Cole yet. She poured the boiling water and wrapped her hands around the cup and stood at the window watching her stepdaughter build something out of sticks in the dirt. And she thought, not yet, but soon. That night, after Cole had gone to bed and the house was quiet, she sat at the kitchen table with a sheet of paper and wrote a list. Not a letter, just a list. Names from conversations, names Cole had mentioned without meaning to give her anything, names the postmaster had said in passing when she'd collected the Salida letters. People in the valley who had a reason to know what Victor Granger's methods looked like from the inside. She wrote 7 names. Then she looked at the list for a while, thought about whether she was overreaching, whether this was her business, whether she had any right to start pulling threads that belonged to other people's lives. She thought about Lily's small face when Granger had ridden into the yard. She hadn't seen it. Lily had been behind the house. But she thought about it anyway. She folded the list and put it in her coat pocket beside the letters. Then she went to bed. The list of 7 names sat in Evelyn's coat pocket for 4 days before she did anything with it. She was not impulsive by nature. She turned things over, looked at them from several angles, checked herself for the kind of certainty that was actually just impatience in disguise. The list felt right. The idea behind it felt right. But feeling right and being right were not always the same thing, and she had learned that the hard way enough times to have the lesson stuck in her bones. What finally moved her was a Tuesday. Ordinary Tuesday, nothing remarkable about it. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Martha Bellamy rode in from the North Road on a bay horse that had seen better years. Martha Bellamy was a rancher's wife in her middle 40s, wide-shouldered, the kind of woman who had worked outdoors long enough that the sun had made a permanent claim on her face. She had brought a crock of preserved peaches as a wedding gift, which was 3 weeks late, and she said so without apology. "We heard about the wedding," Martha said, accepting the cup of coffee Evelyn put in front of her at the kitchen table. "I meant to come sooner. Things got complicated." "Please don't worry about it," Evelyn said. "The peaches are very kind." Martha looked at her in the direct way of a woman who had not spent much of her life on social niceties. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone younger, less steady." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Red Hollow talks. You know that by now." "I suspected," Evelyn said. "They say you showed up on the stagecoach with nothing and talked Cole Dawson into taking you in inside of an hour." Martha's expression was not unkind. "They say it different ways depending on who's telling it." "I expect they do," Evelyn said. "For what it's worth, my version is that a capable woman found herself in a bad situation and handled it with more sense than most." Martha drank her coffee. "My husband Frank thinks Cole's lucky. Frank doesn't say that about many people." "Tell Frank thank you," Evelyn said. She paused, then, "How long have you and Frank been in the valley?" 12 years. "Then you know Victor Granger well." The quality of the silence that followed was answer enough before Martha spoke. It was the silence of someone who had been careful about this subject for a long time and was now deciding how careful to be with this particular person. "We know him," Martha said. "Has he ever made a claim on your land?" Martha set her cup down. "You're direct." "I try to be," Evelyn said. "I find it saves time." Another pause. Martha looked at the window, at the yard, at the peach crock sitting on the counter. 3 years ago," she said, "Granger came to Frank with a water agreement, said our access to the East Creek Channel was running through land he controlled, and he'd need compensation going forward. We'd been using that channel for 11 years, never a word about it." "Did you fight it?" "We tried. The county surveyor, a man named Pittock, drew up a new boundary assessment that somehow ended up with the channel on Granger's side of the line. We know it was wrong. We couldn't prove it." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, the flatness of someone who has processed the outrage and has nothing left but the fact of it. "We rerouted. Cost us 2 months of work and the use of 2 good fields. Frank doesn't talk about it because talking about it doesn't fix it." Evelyn looked at her steadily. "Would Frank be willing to talk about it if talking about it might fix it this time?" Martha looked at her for a long moment. "What are you planning?" "I'm not certain yet," Evelyn said, "but I think Granger has done to other people what he's doing to us, and I think it looks different when it's one family's word against his than it would if several families had the same story." "He has friends in the county office," Martha said. "I know, but county offices change, and lawyers in other towns don't owe Granger anything." Martha was quiet. She drank the rest of her coffee. She looked out the window at the yard where Lily was attempting to teach one of the barn cats to sit on command, with no measurable success. "That your girl?" Martha said. "My stepdaughter," Evelyn said. "Lily. She looks like Cole. Around the eyes." Martha pushed back from the table and stood. She was not a woman who spent more time on anything than it needed. "I'll talk to Frank," she said. No promises, but I'll talk to him. That's all I'm asking, Evelyn said. She told Cole that night. She told him about the list and about Martha Bellamy's visit and what Martha had said about the water channel and the surveyor named Pittock, and she watched his face go through several things in quick succession. Surprise, a flash of something that might have been irritation at not having been consulted, and then a slow consideration that settled into something harder and more purposeful. I should have talked to you first, she said, about the list. Probably, he said. He was not angry exactly, but he was working through it. This isn't a small thing, Evelyn. If we go to the other families and we're wrong, if Marsh can't make the case, I know the risk, she said. These people have their own situations. If we get them involved and then it falls apart, we've made things worse for them. I know that too. She met his eyes. But I think the risk of doing nothing is also real. Granger came here and threatened Lily. He mentioned a county welfare inquiry on a child who has 2 parents, a home, enough food, and no sign of any problem. That's not a legal argument, that's a pressure tactic, and pressure tactics only stop working when you have more pressure to put back. Cole turned his coffee cup on the table. Once. Twice. Martha said their surveyor drew a new boundary that moved the creek channel, he said. Yes. Pittock, Cole said. He's still the county surveyor. I noticed that, Evelyn said. Cole looked up. The thing in his face now was more specific than general worry. It was the focused look of a man who had found a direction. If Pittock falsified a boundary assessment for Granger 3 years ago, and Marsh can tie that to what Granger's claiming about our deed, then it's not one fraudulent document, Evelyn said. It's a pattern, and patterns are what make courts pay attention. He was quiet for a moment. You've been thinking about this for a while, he said, since the night I made the list. You didn't sleep that night, he said. I heard you moving around. She looked at him. You heard me? I don't sleep well, he said simply. I notice when the house is moving around. Something about the way he said it, without self-pity, just as a fact, made her chest tight in a way she didn't examine too closely. Write to Marsh, she said. Tell him about the Bellamys and the water channel and Pittock. See what he says. I'll write tomorrow morning, Cole said. He stood up, pushed the chair back, then paused with his hand on the back of it. Evelyn? Yes. Thank you. For not just... He stopped, started again. Some people would have said it's not their fight. It is my fight, she said. Lily is my fight. He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he nodded once and went to bed, and she sat at the kitchen table for a while longer with her hands around her cooling cup, listening to the house settle around her, thinking about surveyors and county records and the particular way powerful men built their power. Slowly, in layers, each piece looking innocent on its own and only monstrous when you put them together. Theodore Marsh's response to the Bellamy information arrived inside a week, and it was the most energized letter he had written to them yet. He wanted to know if the Bellamys would speak with him directly. He wanted to know if there were other families with similar experiences. He had looked into Pittock's record and found 3 separate boundary assessments in the last 8 years in which the resulting adjustment had benefited Granger Holdings, always by small amounts, always with a plausible technical justification, never enough to trigger a formal complaint on its own. Together they told a different story. Marsh also enclosed a note from the document's examiner in Denver who had reviewed the original loan agreement. The examiner's finding was unambiguous. The 3rd section of the document had been added at a significantly later date than the original signing. The ink composition was different. The paper showed different levels of age and light exposure in the added section. In the examiner's professional opinion, the addition had been made between 15 and 25 years after the original document was executed. Cole read the examiner's report at the kitchen table with Evelyn beside him, and when he finished, he set it down very carefully, as though it were fragile. He made it up, Cole said. Not surprised exactly, but hearing the confirmation said out loud was different from suspecting it. He made it up, Evelyn said. My father never owed him anything. No, she said, he didn't. Cole folded the report and put it back in the envelope with the deliberate steadiness of a man controlling something. I want to go see the Bellamys, he said. Not write. Go in person. Frank should know about this. Agreed, Evelyn said. And I want to look at the county land records myself. Not through Marsh. Myself. I want to see what's registered, in what order, and whether there are other names in there besides ours and the Bellamy's. The county office is in Harwick, Cole said, 20 miles east. I know. Can we make it in a day? If we leave early and push. He looked at her. The county clerk is a man named Dobbins. He's not Granger's man the way Sheriff Teague is, but he's careful. He might not be cooperative. He doesn't have to be cooperative, Evelyn said. He has to follow the law. Public records are public. They went on a Thursday, leaving Lily and Martha Bellamy's care for the day and taking the wagon out before the sun was fully up. The road to Harwick was better than the road to Red Hollow, which was the main thing recommending it. Cole drove with the same focused silence he brought to most physical tasks. Evelyn sat beside him with her list folded in her coat and went over what she was looking for and in what order. The county office in Harwick was a square brick building on the main street that smelled of old paper and wood polish. Dobbins, the county clerk, was a small, precise man of about 60, with the manner of someone who had spent his career protecting himself from getting involved in things and had become very good at it. He looked at Evelyn the way men in official positions often looked at women who came in asking for documents, polite, neutral, and waiting for her to reveal that she didn't quite understand the process. I'd like to review the deed and registration records for the Red Hollow area, Evelyn said, specifically any claims or encumbrances registered by Granger Holdings in the last 20 years. That's a broad request, Dobbins said. It's a public record, Evelyn said pleasantly. I understand it may take some time to pull. We're happy to wait. Dobbins looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him without expression. It may take some time, Dobbins said again. We're in no hurry, Evelyn said. It took 40 minutes. Dobbins brought out a ledger and 2 additional folios and set them on the counter and stood back in the manner of a man who wanted it clearly established that he had provided the documents and was not responsible for whatever anyone did with them. Evelyn opened the ledger. She worked through it methodically, Cole looking over her shoulder, both of them quiet. What she found in the registration records was exactly what she had suspected and worse than she had expected. Granger Holdings had registered encumbrances or easement claims on 11 separate properties in the Red Hollow Valley over the course of 22 years. Some of them were legitimate, recorded at the same time as the original property sale, with both parties' signatures. But 6 of them followed the same pattern, an initial clean registration, followed by an amendment filed several years later, adding a clause or claim that had not appeared in the original. 4 of those 6 amendments had been filed in the same 6-month period. 3 years ago, the same period in which Pittock had redrawn the Bellamy's boundary line. Evelyn made notes on the sheet of paper she'd brought for the purpose. Dates, registration numbers, property names. She wrote quickly and did not look up until she'd gotten everything she needed. Cole pointed silently to a registration near the bottom of the second folio. She looked. The Crane property, the widow who ran sheep on the lower flats. An amendment filed 2 years ago, adding a grazing rights restriction that had not been part of the original deed. She mentioned it to me, Cole said quietly. Last spring. She thought she'd made an error in the original purchase. She didn't make an error, Evelyn said. When she finally looked up, Dobbins was watching them from across the room with the careful expression of someone who was registering what they were looking at without committing to any opinion about it. Thank you, Evelyn said. She closed the ledger. Could I get certified copies of these 6 registration amendments? She handed him the sheet with the reference numbers. I understand there's a fee. Dobbins looked at the list. Then he looked at Evelyn. Then at Cole. Something moved through his face, not quite resolution, but the beginning of it. The look of a man who had been waiting, possibly for years, for someone to come in and ask the right questions. I can have those ready by end of day, he said. We'll come back at 4, Evelyn said. Awesome. They had lunch at a small restaurant near the Harwick livery while they waited. Cole ate without much appetite and spent most of the meal looking out the window with the expression he got when he was working through something he didn't know how to resolve. 6 properties, he said. 6 that we found, Evelyn said. There may be more in other record sets. He's been doing this for 20 years. Yes. And nobody... He stopped. Each family only saw their own piece, Evelyn said. That's how it works. 1 amendment, 1 boundary change, 1 clause buried in the middle of a document. Alone, it looks like a clerical issue or a misunderstanding. You argue about it for a while, you can't afford a lawyer. Granger's patience outlasts yours. You move on. She looked at her coffee. He's betting that no one ever looks at all 6 pieces at once. We're looking at all 6 pieces at once, Cole said. Yes, she said. We are. He was quiet for a moment. The widow Crane, he said. Margaret Crane. She lost her husband 4 years ago. She's been running that place alone. I know. Granger filed the amendment 2 years after her husband died, when she'd had time to be worn down, but not long enough to have found her footing. Cole's voice was flat. He times it. He waits until people are weak, and then he moves. Evelyn had thought the same thing and hadn't said it because saying it out loud made her feel something that was not useful in the middle of a county records office. She said it now, here, in the small restaurant with no one else listening. Yes, that's what I think too. Cole looked at her. He came after us 6 weeks after Clara died, he said. He showed me the document 8 months after. The table between them was very quiet. He was watching, Cole said. He was watching, she agreed. Cole pushed his plate back. He looked like a man who had swallowed something he'd needed to swallow for a while. When we get the copies from Dobbins, he said, I want to go to the Bellamys, and then the Cranes, and then whoever else is on that list of yours. All right, Evelyn said, and then we take everything to Marsh, and we let him tell us what we have. Yes. He looked at her steadily. You knew it was going to be this bad. I suspected, she said. I hoped I was wrong. You weren't. No, she said. I wasn't. Dobbins had the certified copies ready at 3:45. He passed them across the counter in a sealed envelope and said nothing beyond the fee amount. But when Evelyn thanked him, he held eye contact a beat longer than necessary and gave a single short nod that meant something. She filed away. They drove home in the late afternoon light, the copies in Evelyn's bag, both of them mostly quiet, the landscape rolling past on either side in the way it did when you were too preoccupied to see it properly. About halfway home, Cole said, Teague's going to be a problem. Sheriff Teague. She'd heard the names. Cole had mentioned him, Martha had mentioned him, and Dobbins had mentioned him in the careful way people mentioned a weather system they couldn't control. How much is he Granger's man? She said. Enough that I wouldn't take anything to him first. Cole kept his eyes on the road. 3 years ago, when the Bellamys were fighting the water channel issue, Frank went to Teague with what he had. Teague listened, made notes, and the next week Granger's lawyer filed an injunction preemptively blocking any legal challenge to the boundary assessment. He paused. Frank still doesn't know how Granger knew what he was planning to argue. Teague told him, Evelyn said. Almost certainly. Then we go around him, she said. Marsh files in the state court, not the county. Everything goes to Harwick or higher, nothing through Red Hollow channels. That's possible. I'll ask Marsh, but yes, I think so. Granger's influence is local. State courts are harder to buy. Cole glanced at her sideways. You've been thinking about this too. I think about most things for a while before I say them, she said. I've noticed, he said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite warm exactly, but was something in that direction. The tone of a man who found a quality in someone surprising and was deciding how to feel about the surprise. It's a useful habit. My mother called it brooding, Evelyn said. She didn't mean it kindly. Cole was quiet for a moment. My father called it sense, he said. She looked at him. He was a thoughtful man, Cole said. He'd have liked you, I think. He said it simply, like a fact, like reporting something he'd observed. Then he looked back at the road, which she appreciated because it gave her a moment she needed. The visit to the Bellamys happened the following Saturday. Frank Bellamy was a large, deliberate man who resembled nothing so much as a substantial piece of furniture, solid, reliable, not easily moved. He sat at his kitchen table and listened to everything Cole and Evelyn laid out, looking at the registration copies with reading glasses he seemed slightly embarrassed to wear. And when they finished, he was quiet for long enough that Evelyn counted the seconds involuntarily. 6 properties, Frank said. 6 we found, Cole said. Pittock, Frank said. Pittock, Cole confirmed. Frank looked at Martha, who was standing by the stove with her arms folded, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this conversation to happen for 3 years. Something passed between the married couple that wasn't words. A long look, a small shift, a renegotiation of something. "What does your lawyer say?" Frank asked. "He says a pattern of fraudulent registration is a different legal matter than a single disputed document," Evelyn said. "He says if we can bring him testimony from multiple affected parties, he can file in state court with grounds for a full investigation of both Granger Holdings and the county surveyor's office." "State court," Frank said. "Nothing through Red Hollow," Cole said. "Nothing through Teague." Frank's expression tightened at the name and then smoothed out. He took his reading glasses off and folded them with the same careful deliberateness he appeared to bring to everything. "I want to talk to this lawyer myself," he said. "Before I agree to anything, I want to talk to him." "Of course," Evelyn said. "I'll give you Marcia's address." "If Granger finds out we're organizing," Frank stopped. "He'll find out eventually," Martha said from the stove. Her voice was dry and certain. "The only question is whether we've built something solid before he does." Frank looked at his wife for a moment. "Since when do you sound like a general?" he said. "Since 3 years ago, when we lost 2 good fields and you wouldn't talk about it," Martha said. There was nothing unkind in it, just the plain truth, delivered by someone who had been waiting to say it. Frank looked back at the table. He picked up one of the registration copies and looked at the date in the corner soon. The amendment date, 3 years ago, 6 months into the same period that had taken his water channel. "I'll write to your lawyer," he said. "This week." What? Margaret Crane was a different kind of conversation. She was a small woman, younger than Evelyn had expected, probably early 40s, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned not to hope for things too quickly because the disappointment of being wrong had cost her too much. She let them in and gave them water and sat across the table from them with her hands folded and listened to everything without interrupting. When they finished, she said, "I thought it was my mistake." "It wasn't," Evelyn said. "I went through the original purchase papers 3 times. I couldn't find where I'd agreed to the grazing restriction." Her voice was quiet and level. "My husband's brother told me I must have missed it, that I wasn't reading it right." "You weren't reading it wrong," Cole said. "The restriction wasn't there when you signed. It was added after." Margaret looked at the copy of her registration amendment, the certified copy Evelyn had pulled from Harwick. Her hands unfolded and then refolded. "He waited 2 years," she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "He waited until I'd decided that fighting things wasn't worth it anymore." She looked up. "That's a thing a person can decide, you know, after a while, when you're tired." She said it without apology, just explaining herself the way she clearly felt she had to. "I know," Evelyn said. "That's what he's counting on." "Why are you doing this?" Margaret said. The question was directed at Evelyn specifically, not Cole. "You've been here, 2 months? You could have taken your husband's offer to sell and been done with it. Gone somewhere easier." "He didn't make the offer to me," Evelyn said. "He made it to Cole. You know what I mean." Evelyn thought about it honestly for a moment. She was not interested in performing nobility. "I had nothing when I came here," she said. "This place gave me something, and I don't surrender things easily once I have them." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. Not quite the skepticism going away, but something under it moving. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Testimony," Evelyn said. "A signed statement describing when Granger approached you, what he claimed, and what the effect has been on your property use. Our lawyer can explain exactly what form it needs to take." "Will it work?" Margaret said. "I don't know," Evelyn said. "I can't promise you that. I can tell you that we have more than we did, and that more families are likely to come forward once they know they're not alone in it." Margaret looked at the amendment again. 2 years I've been managing around that restriction," she said. "Moving the flock, using the lower pasture in the wet months." She stopped. "I lost 12 sheep last winter because I couldn't get them to the upper shelter in time." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Cole said. Margaret unfolded her hands and spread them flat on the table in a gesture that looked like she was steadying herself. "Tell me what the statement needs to say," she said. "I'll write it today." They had 4 families by the end of the following week. The Bellamys, the Cranes, a family named Dorado who farmed on the South Valley Flat and had lost access to a road easement 3 years ago, and an older couple named the Whelans who had been quietly fighting a water fee that had appeared on their account without explanation 18 months ago and had been paying it because they couldn't figure out how to stop. Evelyn compiled everything into a packet and wrote a cover letter to Theodore Marsh that was 6 pages long and laid out the pattern with the specific clarity of someone who had kept books and understood that the power of information was in its organization. She laid it out chronologically. She laid it out by property. She laid it out by method. The delayed amendments, the surveyor's adjustments, the timing relative to each family's vulnerable period. She sealed it and sent it express. 3 days later, Marsh sent back a single page that said, in his careful, compact hand, "This is sufficient to file. We should discuss next steps in person. Come as soon as you can." She put the letter on the table in front of Cole at breakfast. He read it. He set it down. "Salida," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her across the table. Lily was still upstairs, the sound of her moving around overhead meaning she was getting dressed, probably putting both shoes on the wrong feet and having to be corrected. The morning light came through the kitchen window and lay across the table between them, the same as it always did. "We have something," Cole said. Not a question. "We have something," Evelyn said. He nodded slowly. His hands on the table were still, not tense, just still. The look on his face was the look of a man who has been holding a thing together by will alone for long enough that he'd stopped believing it would ever be anything except will, and who is now confronting the possibility that it might actually hold. "I keep thinking he's going to do something," Cole said. "Before we can file. He's going to know we're organizing." "He might," Evelyn said. "Probably sooner or later someone will say something in town and it'll reach him." "And then what?" "Then we file faster," she said. He almost smiled. "That's your plan?" "That's the part of the plan that depends on him," she said. "The part that depends on us is the packet I just sent to Marsh, and the 4 families who signed statements, and the certified copies from Harwick." Cole looked at the Marsh letter again. Outside, the gray mare moved in the pasture. Above them, Lily could be heard coming down the stairs with the specific thunder of a small child who had only one speed on staircases. Evelyn reached across the table and tapped the letter once with 2 fingers. "He spent 20 years building this," she said. "We built our piece in 8 weeks. That tells you something." "What does it tell me?" "That he was comfortable," she said. "He's never had to move fast because no one has ever pushed him. He doesn't know how to be pushed back." Cole considered this. "You're saying we have an advantage." "I'm saying we have a different kind of patience," she said. "He waits for people to wear down. We're not wearing down." The kitchen door banged open and Lily arrived in a rush of energy and wrong-footed boots, immediately demanding to know if there were eggs for breakfast, and announcing that she had seen a very suspicious bird on the fence post that she thought was planning something. Cole looked at his daughter and then looked at Evelyn, and this time the thing that moved through his face was not controlled before she saw it. She saw all of it, the complicated layered thing that had no single name, and she looked back at him steadily and let him see that she was not going anywhere. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't resolved. The letter from Marsh was a beginning, not an ending, and Granger was still out there with his money and his county connections and his careful, patient methods. The work ahead of them was real and uncertain, and there was no version of it that was going to be easy. But they had something, and something, Evelyn had learned, was the only thing you could ever actually build from. Victor Granger's next move came on a Wednesday, and it did not look like what they'd been bracing for. It came not as a threat or a legal filing, but as a conversation. A visit by Sheriff Teague to the ranch just past noon, alone, in his official capacity, holding a folded paper with the county seal on it. Cole was in the north field. Evelyn was in the yard when Teague rode in. She had seen him once at a distance in town. A heavy-set man in his late 40s with a drooping mustache and the careful, watchful eyes of someone who had learned that the most important thing in his line of work was knowing whose side to be on. He dismounted and greeted her with professional politeness and asked for Cole. "He's working," Evelyn said. "What is this about?" Teague looked at the paper in his hand, then at her. "I've been asked to deliver a formal notice," he said, "regarding a complaint filed with the county welfare office." The ground felt different under her feet for a moment. Just a moment. Filed by whom? She said. Filed by a concerned party on behalf of the minor child Lily Dawson, Teague said. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, she noticed. Not enough to make her feel better about it. The notice requests a formal welfare assessment within 30 days. On what grounds? She said. The complaint cites concerns about the financial stability of the household and the suitability of, he paused, choosing the word, of recent changes in the child's living situation. Recent changes. She was the recent change. That was what this was. She took the paper from him with a steadiness she had to manufacture from scratch. She looked at it. It was real. County seal, signatures, the correct formal language. Someone had filed this properly, through channels, in a way that would be very difficult to dismiss quickly. When did this come in? She said. Filed Monday, Teague said. 2 days ago, 4 days after she had mailed the packet to Theodore Marsh. She looked at Teague. He looked back at her with his watchful eyes, and she thought, you knew about the packet. Someone told him, and he told Granger, and this is the response. Not a legal challenge to the deed case. That would come later. This was faster. This was aimed at something more immediate than property. This was aimed at Lily. Tell the county welfare office we'll be in full cooperation with any assessment, she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. My husband will be informed when he returns. Of course, Teague said. He mounted and rode out. She stood in the yard and watched him go, and did not let herself feel what she was feeling until the sound of his horse had faded all the way down the road, and she was certain no one was watching. Then she stood there for a while longer in the September heat, holding the paper with the county seal, thinking about a man who had waited 20 years and more, and who had just shown her exactly how far he was willing to go when someone finally pushed him back. She had told Cole, he doesn't know how to be pushed. She was beginning to understand that wasn't entirely true. He knew how to be pushed. He just never had to do it with someone who wouldn't stop pushing back. She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket, next to the list of names that had started all of this, and went inside to write the most urgent letter she had written yet. The letter Evelyn wrote that afternoon was the longest she had sent to Theodore Marsh yet, and the most carefully worded. She described the welfare complaint in full, the filing date, the county seal, the language about recent changes in the child's living situation. And she laid out the timeline beside it. The packet mailed to Marsh on Thursday, the complaint filed on Monday, Teague's delivery on Wednesday. She did not say outright that Granger had orchestrated the filing. She didn't need to. The timeline said it plainly enough for anyone willing to read. She also wrote to Margaret Crane and to Martha Bellamy, brief notes asking if either of them had seen or heard anything unusual in the last week. Any conversation in town, any visit from county officials, any indication that someone was making inquiries about the families involved in the statements they'd signed. She sealed all 3 envelopes and rode to town herself that afternoon, rather than waiting for the next supply run, because she had learned from watching Granger operate that speed was its own form of defense. Cole came in from the north field at dusk to find supper on the table and Evelyn sitting across from Lily, helping her with the letters she was laboriously copying from a primer into a composition book. He washed up and sat down and looked at the two of them, at the normal domestic shape of the scene, and something in his face said he already knew something was wrong. He had lived long enough with difficulty to be able to smell it in a room even when no one was speaking it. He waited until Lily was in bed. Evelyn put the welfare notice on the table in front of him without preamble and let him read it. He read it twice. The second time was slower. When he set it down, the line of his jaw was tight in a way that was not anger exactly, but was adjacent to it. The specific tightness of someone restraining a response they don't trust themselves to have out loud. Filed Monday, he said, 4 days after the packet went to Marsh. Someone told him. Not a question. Someone told him, she said. It may have been Teague directly, or it may have been someone who mentioned it in town. We were careful, but not invisible. Cole pushed the notice to the side with the flat of his hand, not violently, just decisively, as though moving it out of his direct line of sight so he could think more clearly. What does this do to the filing? If Marsh moves forward and there's an open welfare assessment, it complicates it, Evelyn said. Not in terms of the legal case. The two matters are separate. But it takes attention. It takes time we'd rather spend on the deed case. And if the welfare assessment goes badly, it won't, Cole said. I know, but we need to be prepared for it to be uncomfortable. An assessor coming to the house, asking Lily questions, making judgments about how we live. She paused. Lily shouldn't know what it's about. She'll worry. She picks up on things, Cole said. I know. We tell her a county person is coming to visit, and it's nothing unusual. Which is true. There's nothing wrong here to find. Cole nodded slowly. He looked at the wall above the stove, at the place where a small hook held a tin cup that had been there since before he'd lived in this house. Since his mother's time, maybe. He was somewhere inside himself for a moment, and she let him be. He's doing what he said he'd do, Cole said finally. Back in the yard that first time. He said stress on a small child. He said it like a suggestion. He was telling us what he had in reserve, Evelyn said. He waited to see if we'd back down on our own. Cole looked at her. And when we didn't, he used it. Another silence. Outside, the wind had picked up. A dry, westerly wind that rattled the window frame in the parlor the way it always did when the weather was thinking about changing. Write to Marsh tonight, Cole said. Tell him we need the filing accelerated if that's possible. I already wrote to him, she said. This afternoon. He looked at her. I also wrote to Martha and Margaret, she said, asking them to be alert. Cole was quiet for a moment with an expression that was doing several things at once. You did all that before I got in from the field, he said. There wasn't a reason to wait, she said. He rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a tired man at the end of a long day who has just discovered the day has further to go. You didn't need to wait for me to decide, he said. It was not a criticism. It was closer to recognition. You just did it. It needed doing, she said simply. I can make decisions. You should know that by now. I do know that. He dropped his hands. I'm not complaining. He stopped, started over. In my first marriage, Clara and I decided things together. Always. Even small things. He said it carefully, not comparing, just explaining the geography of what he was used to. This is different. We make the big things together, Evelyn said. Do you want me to wait on the small things? He thought about it honestly. No, he said. No, the way you do it is better. I just have to get used to it. Take your time, she said, and started clearing the supper dishes. And after a moment, he got up and helped her, which was something he'd started doing about 2 weeks ago without comment, and neither of them had said anything about it because it didn't require anything said. Jack. Marsh's reply to the accelerated filing request came back in 5 days, and it was a qualified yes. Qualified because accelerating the filing meant filing with what they currently had before any additional testimony could be gathered, which made the case narrower than he'd wanted. But the welfare complaint changed the calculus, he wrote. Filing quickly established a legal record that made the welfare matter look like what it was. Retaliatory. A judge seeing a welfare complaint filed 4 days after a land fraud challenge would draw conclusions without needing them spelled out. He set a filing date of 2 weeks out, which was the fastest he could properly prepare. 2 weeks. Evelyn marked it on the small calendar she kept on the kitchen shelf. 14 days. She spent them doing what she had been doing, organizing, writing, thinking, and also something new, which was making herself visible in town in a way she had not been before. She had a reason for this. She had thought about it carefully and decided that visibility was itself a form of defense. Granger's methods depended on silence, on isolated families who didn't know each other's situations, on the particular shame that came with financial trouble and legal difficulty. Silence was the medium in which he operated, so she stopped being quiet. She was not dramatic about it. She didn't make speeches or tell anyone directly what was happening. But she went to the dry goods store and talked to people. She accepted an invitation to a women's sewing circle she had previously declined on the grounds of busyness. She stopped at the livery when she saw Frank Bellamy there, and they talked for 20 minutes in plain sight of anyone walking past, which in a small town was as good as an announcement that the Dawsons and the Bellamys were allied. She let people see her. She let people know, in the indirect language of small-town communication, that the situation on the Dawson ranch was not the simple story Granger's side preferred, a stubborn man refusing a fair offer, now complicated by a questionable new wife. She let them see that the wife was not questionable, that the wife was organized and settled and unafraid. Martha Bellamy told her 2 weeks into this campaign that 3 different women had approached her separately to ask what was really happening with Victor Granger and the Dawson property. They've been wondering for years, Martha said. They just didn't have anyone to wonder to. Tab. The welfare assessor came on a Thursday morning, 12 days before the filing date. She was a county employee named Mrs. Dorset, a lean woman in her 50s with a notebook and the practiced neutrality of someone who had assessed a great many situations and had learned not to show her conclusions until she was required to. She looked at the house, which was clean and organized and had a child's drawings pinned to the kitchen wall and food in the pantry and firewood stacked properly against the coming cold. She talked to Cole, then to Evelyn, then, separately, with Lily on the porch in the afternoon while the adults stayed inside. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and listened to the murmur of voices through the window and did not let herself look out. Cole sat across from her and did look out. Couldn't help it. And she reached across the table and put her hand briefly over his without saying anything, and he turned his hand over and held it. And neither of them said anything for the 10 minutes that Lily was out there on the porch being assessed by a stranger. When Mrs. Dorset came back inside, she spent another few minutes making notes in her book. Then she closed it and looked at them both. The child is healthy, she said. She's clearly well-loved and articulate and knows where she is in the world. She paused. She told me her stepmother fixed her foot the day they met. She had a splinter, Evelyn said. She described it in some detail, Mrs. Dorset said, with something that was not quite a smile but was near one. I'll file my report by the end of the week. I don't anticipate any follow-up action. Cole let out a breath that had been waiting for a while. Thank you, Evelyn said. The complaint was filed anonymously, Mrs. Dorset said, closing her satchel. She said it to the middle distance, not to either of them directly, in the manner of someone providing information without technically providing information. Anonymous complaints sometimes reflect genuine concern, sometimes they reflect other things. She left. The sound of her buggy going down the road was one of the better sounds Evelyn had heard in recent weeks. Cole put his elbows on the table and his face in his hands for a moment, not crying, just releasing pressure the only way available to him in that moment. Evelyn got up and poured 2 cups of coffee and put one in front of him and sat back down. It's all right, she said. He lifted his face. His eyes were dry but tired. I know, he said. I knew it would be fine. I knew there was nothing for her to find. But knowing and sitting through it are different things. Yes, he said. They are. Lily came in through the back door carrying a frog. Again. It might have been the same frog. Evelyn genuinely could not tell. She was nice, Lily announced. The county lady. She had good shoes. Cole looked at his daughter with the expression that had no name. I'm glad she had good shoes, Evelyn said. Please put the frog outside. It's getting cold, Lily said. Frogs don't like cold. Then find him a better spot in the barn. Lily considered this a reasonable compromise and departed. On the Monday before the filing date, Evelyn and Cole drove to Salida together and spent 3 hours in Theodore Marsh's office going through the complete case document. Marsh was a spare, methodical man who became animated in the way accountants became animated when a set of numbers finally balanced. Quiet, precise excitement, the satisfaction of a pattern revealed. He laid out the evidence across his desk. The document's examiner's report, the certified county records showing the 6 fraudulent amendments, the 4 family statements, the timeline correlation between the welfare complaint and their legal preparation. In a county court, Marsh said, Granger's connections would make this harder. In a state proceeding, what this looks like is a systematic pattern of property fraud combined with retaliatory use of county administrative resources. He tapped the welfare complaint. This was a mistake on his part. Filing this made the pattern visible in a way the property case alone might not have. He thought it would scare us off, Cole said. Instead, it added a count, Marsh said. Potentially. The state attorney's office has been looking for grounds to investigate the surveyor's office for 2 years. This may be what opens that inquiry. Evelyn looked at the stacked documents on the desk. 8 weeks of work, organized into a coherent argument. When you file on Thursday, she said, how long before Granger knows? He'll know within the day, Marsh said. His lawyer is Raymond Poole. Poole is thorough and he's well-funded. He'll respond quickly. What do you expect the response to be? Marsh considered it. Counterfiling. An attempt to have the case dismissed on procedural grounds. Possibly pressure on the county records office to restrict access to the documents we've already certified. He paused. He may also try to move the original loan claim through a separate channel, attempting to force the property issue independently of the fraud case. Separate it from the fraud finding so it appears to stand alone. Can he do that? Cole asked. He can try. I'll file to consolidate the cases. Whether the court agrees depends on the judge assigned. Marsh looked at them both steadily. I want to be honest with you. We have a strong case, strong enough that I'm confident about filing. But Granger has resources and experience with legal processes. This will not be fast, and it will not be without setbacks. I'm not expecting fast, Cole said. Good. Marsh gathered the papers together with the careful efficiency of a man who treated documents the way some men treated tools, with respect for their specific purpose. Go home. Let me file. And try not to be alone out there this week. Cole looked at him. What does that mean? Marsh was quiet for a moment that was slightly longer than usual. It means that men who have operated without consequence for 20 years sometimes respond poorly when they first feel consequence approaching, he said. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't say, be careful. The drive home from Salida was quieter than usual. The landscape moved past them in the way it did. The dry grass, the cottonwoods going gold at the edge of the creek, the hills rolling toward the blue distance. Cole drove with his eyes ahead, and Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap and thought about what Marsh had said and tried to assess how seriously to take it. Seriously, she decided. You took careful men's careful warnings seriously. We should tell the Bellamys, she said, and the others, that the filing is Thursday. Yes, Cole said. I'll write to Frank's tomorrow. Martha should know especially. She has the most direct access to town, and she'll hear things we won't. All right. He was quiet for a mile or so. Evelyn? Yes? If something happens, nothing is going to happen, she said. I know, but if it does... He kept his eyes on the road. Lily would be fine. Legally. The marriage covers her regardless of what Granger does with the property case. Marsh explained that. He stopped. Started again differently. I'm not worried about the legal situation. I'm saying, if something happened to me, you'd have the standing to raise her, if you wanted to. She looked at him. You don't have to answer that, he said. I just want you to know I'm not indifferent to what that would mean, what I'd be asking, if it came to that. Evelyn looked at the road ahead for a long moment. Cole, she said. Yes. Nothing is going to happen, she said again. But yes, if it did. The answer is yes. He nodded once, slowly, and didn't say anything else, and they drove the rest of the way home in a silence that was different from most silences, the kind that had something settled in it. Thursday came and Theodore Marsh filed. By Friday, the news had moved through Red Hollow the way news did in small towns, carried in pieces, from different directions, arriving at different times and in different forms depending on who was telling it. What Evelyn heard from Martha Bellamy, who came by the ranch Friday afternoon with the same pretext of returning a borrowed pot, was that Raymond Poole had been seen leaving the county office in a hurry on Thursday evening, that Teague had been to the telegraph office twice, that Granger had been seen driving toward Harwick himself on Friday morning, which he almost never did. He's moving, Martha said. We expected that, Evelyn said. Frank wants to know if there's anything else we can do. Stay visible, Evelyn said. Same as before. If anyone asks, neighbors, anyone in town, tell them what's happening. Plain language. Granger's been filing fraudulent property claims on Valley families for 20 years, and someone finally took it to state court. She looked at Martha. The more people who know, the harder it is for him to contain it. Martha nodded. She stood to go, then paused. You know he's not just going to sit with this, she said. I know, Evelyn said. Frank thinks he'll go after the filing on procedural grounds. And if that doesn't work... Martha stopped. If that doesn't work, he'll do something else, Evelyn said. Yes. Marsh warned us. Martha looked at her for a moment with the direct, unsentimental gaze she'd had from the beginning. You're not scared, she said. Not accusing. Just observing. I'm scared, Evelyn said. I just don't have anywhere useful to put it. Martha made a sound that was something close to a laugh. Fair enough, she said, and left. The fire started on a Saturday afternoon. Cole and Evelyn were in town. A supply run that had been planned for 2 days, flour and lamp oil, and a new buckle for the harness on the wagon. Lily was with them. The day was clear and the wind had died down to almost nothing, which was the kind of afternoon that felt safe without meaning to. They were coming out of the dry goods store when they saw the smoke. It was not the tentative, questioning smoke of a cook fire or a burn pile. It was the dark, thick, purposeful smoke of something that had been given help getting started. It rose from the direction of the eastern hills, and even before Evelyn could place exactly where it was coming from, the cold certainty was already in her stomach. Cole placed it faster. He said something short and hard and was moving before she had fully processed what he'd said. She grabbed Lily's hand and ran after him toward where the wagon was hitched. "Don't," she said when she reached him. He was already untying the horse. "Cole, don't go alone." "It's the barn," he said. His voice was stripped of everything except the fact. "Then we go together." "Lily, Martha's shop is on the corner," Evelyn said. "I'll leave Lily there. Cole, wait." But he was already moving. She watched the wagon go and had exactly 4 seconds to make a decision, and then she grabbed Lily's hand and ran toward the corner where Martha Bellamy's husband Frank had his small tack and supply shop, and she pushed through the door and said, as quickly and clearly as she could, to Frank, who was behind the counter, "The Dawson barn is burning." Cole went ahead. "I need to leave Lily here and go." Frank was already untying his own apron. "I'm coming with you," he said. "Lily?" "Martha's in the back," Frank said. "Lily, go find Martha." Lily's face had gone pale and stiff with the particular stillness of a child who understands something is very wrong and is holding herself together through it. "Is Papa going to be all right?" she said. "Your Papa is going to be fine," Evelyn said, and she made her voice absolutely steady when she said it because Lily needed her to, and then she handed her gently toward the back of the shop and ran outside. Frank drove. 2 other men from the street had seen the smoke and were coming. The Dorado family's eldest son, 18 years old, on horseback, and a man Evelyn didn't know who drove a buckboard alongside them at a pace that shook everything in it. Behind them, as they left the edge of town, she could see more people gathering, more horses turning east. The smoke was heavier by the time they reached the ranch road. She could smell it. The dense chemical smell of burning timber mixed with hay and oil. The smell that meant something had been accelerating for a while. The barn was fully involved when they came over the last rise. The fire had taken the whole left side of the structure and was eating its way toward the right. The heat was visible even from the road, a wavering distortion in the air around the building that kept you instinctively back. Cole's wagon was stopped in the yard, the horse wild-eyed and refusing to go closer, and Cole himself was not where she expected him to be. He was inside. She knew it before she saw the evidence of it. The side door of the barn hanging open, the specific absence of him from the yard. And her heart did something that was not quite stopping but was close. Frank grabbed her arm before she got halfway across the yard. "Don't," he said. "He's in there." "I know. Let the men get water on it first. Let it—" And then Cole came out. He came through the side door half-crouched and moving fast with the gray mare's lead rope in one hand, and the mare herself plunging and resisting behind him, her eyes showing white, her breath ragged with terror. He was coughing before he'd cleared the door, bent forward with it, but he was moving, and the mare came out with him stumbling and then finding her feet in the yard and wheeling hard away from the heat. Evelyn crossed the remaining distance between them at something close to a run. He straightened when he saw her. His face was streaked with soot and his eyes were red, and he was still coughing, but he was whole, and he was standing, and the mare, Sage, the gray mare, Clara's horse, was standing in the yard, shaking, but alive. The other 2 got out when the fire started, he managed between coughs. The gate on the north paddock was open. Sage wouldn't— "Stop talking," Evelyn said. She got her hands on his face and looked at him. His eyes, his hands, the singed edges of his sleeve. "Are you burned?" "No." He pulled a breath. "Smoke. Just smoke." "You went in for a horse," she said. "She was Clara's," he said, as though this explained it completely, which it did. Evelyn looked at him for a moment with her hands still on either side of his face, and she made herself not say the 3 or 4 things that wanted to come out at once, about the risk, about what could have happened, about the fact that she had stood in Frank Bellamy's buckboard looking at a burning barn knowing he was inside it. She made herself set all of that aside because it was not the moment for it, and because he already knew it, and because the mare was standing 12 feet away with her sides heaving and her head low, And Cole was alive and standing in her hands. She dropped her hands. "All right," she said. "All right." Frank and the two young men had gotten the water buckets going from the yard trough, and others were arriving now. The Dorados, two families she recognized from the South Valley, a wagon from town with barrels of water sloshing in the back. The fire was not going to be fully stopped. Too much of the barn was already gone, but it could be kept from the house if they worked fast and the wind stayed low. They worked. Everyone worked. Men and women, hauling buckets and soaking the ground around the house perimeter and keeping the horses away from the burning structure. Evelyn worked beside them, her skirt tucked up, her hands going raw from the bucket handles, doing the simple mechanical labor of it because the fire didn't care who you were or what you'd been building for 8 weeks. It just needed to be answered. The barn was gone by evening. What remained was the skeleton of the frame charred and smoking and the sour smell of wet ash that would be in the air for days. The house stood. The north paddock fence stood. The two horses that had escaped early stood in the far meadow, tired and watchful. Sage stood closest to Cole, even now, long after the danger had passed, as if she'd decided that was where she was staying. In the yard, as the light faded and the work shifted to checking the ground for embers, Evelyn stood next to Frank Bellamy and looked at what was left. "Whoever started it left from the south field," Frank said quietly. He was not speculating. He'd walked the perimeter while others worked, and he'd found what he was looking for. Tracks, 2 horses. They came in from the creek side. The lock on the south door was cut. "Not an accident," Evelyn said. "No," Frank said. "Not even close." She had known it wasn't, but hearing it confirmed was different. She stood with it for a moment, the weight of it, the reality of what Granger was willing to do when he was cornered. Marsh had said, "Be careful." This was what careful had been bracing for. "Frank," she said. "Yes. I need you to do something for me, tonight if you can." He looked at her. "Ride to the Cranes and to the Dorados and to the Whelans." She kept her voice low, not because anyone nearby wasn't already on their side, but because she needed to say this precisely. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them Granger burned a barn 3 days after a legal filing against his property interests. Tell them that every one of them is potentially a target now that the case is visible." She paused and asked them if they're willing to stand with us publicly, in town, where people can see them. Frank looked at the ruined barn, the smoking frame, the yard full of neighbors who had come without being asked. "What does that accomplish?" he said. Not skeptical, just asking. "He's betting we're afraid," Evelyn said. "He's betting that a burned barn is enough to make us pull back. And maybe it is, for some people. But if instead of pulling back, the valley shows up." She looked at the people around the yard, the families who had come with their buckets and their labor. "He's been operating on silence for 20 years. He can't operate on silence if there isn't any." Frank looked at the people in the yard, too. His expression was going through something. "That Dorado boy," he said. "He rode out from town the minute he saw the smoke. Didn't know whose place it was until he got here." "I know," Evelyn said. "Half these people Granger's had dealings with at some point." Frank's voice was quiet and certain. "They've all been quiet about it. Separately." "Yes," she said. "Separately." He looked at her then. The big deliberate man who resembled furniture. Solid, not easily moved. He had been moved. She could see it happening. "I'll ride tonight," he said. Cole found her sitting on the porch steps at 9 o'clock, when the yard had mostly cleared and the last of the neighbors had gone home, and Lily had been collected from Martha and put to bed after a conversation that required Evelyn to explain, in the calm and honest way she tried to do everything, that the barn had been damaged by fire, that no one was hurt, that they were all safe. Lily had accepted this with a gravity that was too old for her face, and then asked if Sage was all right. And when Evelyn said yes, Sage was fine. Something had released in the child's expression that told Evelyn exactly how much Lily understood about why that horse mattered. Cole sat down on the step beside her. They looked at the dark shape of what had been the barn against the sky. "Marsh needs to know," he said. "I already wrote it," she said. "It's on the kitchen table." He nodded. He had stopped being surprised by this. "Frank's writing to the other families tonight," she said. "I asked him to." I know, he told me before he left. Cole was quiet for a moment. That was the right call. I wasn't sure if you'd think so. I'm sure, he said. The night was cooling fast the way September nights did, the heat of the fire long dissipated into the dark. The smell of ash lingered. It would linger for days. Sage is in the north paddock, Cole said. She wouldn't go to the far meadow with the other two. She kept coming back to the fence closest to the house. She knows where she is, Evelyn said. Claire used to say that horse understood more than was sensible. He was quiet. I almost didn't go in. For a second, I stood at that door and thought about whether it was worth it. What made you go? He thought about it. I thought about Clara watching me not go, he said. That was enough. Evelyn looked at the dark sky. The stars were thick and cold overhead, the way they got in the clear mountain air on the edge of autumn. She thought about a woman she'd never met, who had ridden fence lines and come back with the repairs listed in order of importance, who had laughed easily and who had left behind a horse and a daughter, and a man who still couldn't go into the closed room. She sounds like she was someone worth knowing, Evelyn said. She was, Cole said. Then I'm glad you went in, she said. For her. He looked at her sideways. The expression on his face in the dark was the unguarded one again, the one that happened when he'd run out of resources to control it. I'm glad I came out, he said, and the way he said it meant something beyond the barn, beyond the fire, and she heard all of it. The following week was the longest Evelyn had spent since arriving at Red Hollow. Marsh filed an emergency motion documenting the fire and its timing and asking the state court to note it as potential evidence of intimidation. A court in the state capital issued an acknowledgement within 3 days, which Marsh said was unusually fast and suggested the filing had found receptive ears higher up than expected. The state attorney's office sent a letter, brief, formal, non-committal, indicating they were monitoring the situation. Granger said nothing publicly. His lawyer filed a procedural challenge to the fraud case on technical grounds that Marsh described as creative but unlikely to succeed. Pittock the surveyor quietly submitted his resignation from the county office, which no one had publicly requested, but which told its own story. The neighbors came, not all at once, not with any announcement, just in the way that things moved in small communities. A family stopping by to help clear the barn site, another arriving with lumber contributed from their own stores, the Dorado boy returning 3 days in a row without being asked. By the end of the first week, there were enough people on the property on any given day that it had begun to feel less like a targeted ranch and more like a place where people had decided to be. Margaret Crane came on a Wednesday and stayed the whole day, and what she and Evelyn talked about over the course of that day was not only the legal case, but something broader and less easily named. The way isolation was itself a tool, and what it felt like when that tool stopped working. Margaret had a quality that Evelyn was beginning to recognize in the people who had survived Granger's methods. A kind of tired toughness, like metal that had been bent and bent without quite breaking, and now held its shape through memory rather than fresh strength. I haven't talked to the Whelans in 2 years, Margaret said. We were friendly before, and then each of us had our own trouble and we each went quiet about it, and somehow that became distance. Granger didn't create the distance, Evelyn said, but he used it. Yes, Margaret said, he used it. On Thursday, a man Evelyn had not met before rode to the ranch and introduced himself as Owen Ferris, who ran a small newspaper out of Harwick. He had heard about the state court filing and about the fire, and he wanted to know if Cole Dawson would speak with him. Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Owen Ferris, who was a youngish man, late 20s, thin, with the slightly harried look of someone who ran a publication on too little money and too much conviction. What do you write? She said. News, he said. County matters, mostly. Occasionally something that matters farther out. Who reads you? 300 subscribers in the Harwick Valley, another 100 or so scattered. Some of the papers in the capital pick up my pieces occasionally. She thought about Marsh's words. The filing had found receptive ears higher up than expected. She thought about Granger's 20 years of careful silence. She thought about a surveyor quietly resigning. Come inside, she said. We'll talk. Cole told Owen Ferris about the document, the amended deed, the 6 fraudulent registrations, the welfare complaint filed 4 days after the legal challenge. He told it plainly, without dramatics. Evelyn added what she had found in the county records. They did not accuse Granger of starting the fire directly. They described the timeline and let Owen Ferris reach his own conclusions, which he clearly did. He wrote for 2 hours at the kitchen table and wrote out with what he had, and said he'd send them a copy when it ran. That night, with the house quiet and Lily asleep, and the half-cleared barn site dark against the stars, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and felt, for the first time since Thursday's smoke had risen over the eastern hills, something that was not quite relief, but was in that direction. Not because anything was resolved. It was not. The case was in the courts and would be there for months, and Granger still had his money and his county connections, and Raymond Poole working every angle that existed. There were real things still ahead of them, hard things, but something had shifted. She could feel it the way you felt a wind change, not seeing it exactly, but knowing by the different quality of the air. Cole came in from checking the paddock and sat down across from her and looked at the cleared table with its one lamp burning. "Ferris's piece runs next week," he said. "Yes?" "Frank thinks 2 more families from the North Valley might come forward. The Marsh filing is public record now. People can read what we found." "Good," she said. He looked at her. "You're tired," he said. "I'm always tired," she said. "I don't notice it much anymore." "You should sleep." "I will." She didn't move. The lamp made a small circle of light between them. "Cole, are you afraid?" He considered it with the same seriousness he brought to real questions. "Of Granger?" "Of all of it. The case, what comes next, whether it works." He was quiet, the kind of quiet that was actual thinking. "I'm afraid of it not working," he said. "Not for my sake, for Lily's, and for the other families. If we built all this and it falls apart, they've exposed themselves for nothing." "It won't fall apart," she said. "You don't know that." "No," she said. "I don't know it, but I believe it." She looked at the lamp. "We have enough. I've looked at everything we have, and it's enough. Marsh believes it's enough. What we need now is to keep steady while the process runs." "Keeping steady," Cole said, "is harder than building the case." "I know," she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, the reverse of what she'd done to him in Frank's buckboard before the fire. His hand was warm and work-roughened and sat over hers without pressure, just presence, the weight of it deliberate and honest. "We keep steady," he said. She turned her hand over and held his. "Yes," she said. Outside, somewhere in the north paddock, the gray mare moved in the dark, her hooves quiet on the autumn grass, patient and steady as the land itself beneath them. Owen Ferris's piece ran on a Tuesday, and by Friday it had been picked up by 2 papers in the capital. Evelyn read the reprinted version at the kitchen table, with her coffee going cold beside her. Ferris had written it straight. No embellishment, no dramatic reconstruction, just the facts laid out in the order they had occurred, which turned out to be more damning than any editorial flourish could have managed. The fraudulent amendments, the 6 properties, the surveyor, the welfare complaint filed 4 days after the legal challenge, the barn fire and its timing. He had let the sequence speak for itself, and the sequence was merciless. Cole read it after her and set it down and said nothing for a moment. "He got it right," he said finally. "He did," she said. "Granger will know we talked to him." "Granger already knows everything we do approximately 3 days after we do it," Evelyn said. "At this point, I'd rather the Capitol papers know it too." That same Friday, Theodore Marsh sent a brief telegraph message rather than a letter, which told her something about the urgency of it. "State attorney has opened formal inquiry into county surveyor's office. Pittock has been interviewed. Do not speak to press further until we talk. Filing proceeding on schedule. T. Marsh." She read the telegraph twice and then walked to the north paddock where Cole was repairing the fence line and handed it to him without comment. He read it and looked up at her with the careful expression of a man who had trained himself not to feel things prematurely. "The state attorney," he said. "Yes. That's bigger than the civil case." "Yes," she said. "It is." He looked back at the telegraph. "Pittock talked," he said. "That's what this means. Marsh said the inquiry would only open if they had something from the inside. Or if the pattern in the public records was strong enough on its own," Evelyn said. "But yes, Pittock talked." Cole folded the telegraph and put it in his shirt pocket. He picked up the fence tool and turned back to the post he'd been working on, and she watched him drive a nail with 3 clean strokes, and she understood that this was how he processed things. Through his hands, through work, through the physical language of the ranch that had been his father's before him. She left him to it and went back to the house and started a reply to Marsh because that was how she processed things. The weeks that followed had a strange double quality. Ordinary on the surface, charged underneath. The barn site got cleared. The Dorado boy, whose name was Esteban, came so regularly to help that Cole eventually just put him on the payroll at a modest day rate, which Esteban accepted with the dignified gratitude of someone who needed the work but wouldn't have asked for it. New timber was sourced. The frame of a replacement barn began to go up slowly on the same footprint as the old one, built by more hands than just Cole's. Neighbors showing up on weekends without formal invitation, the labor appearing the way labor sometimes did in tight communities, as a statement of position more than a practical calculation. Through October and into November, letters and telegraphs moved between the Dawson Ranch and Marsh's office in a steady current. Raymond Poole filed 4 separate procedural motions attempting to delay or redirect the fraud case. Marsh answered each one. The state attorney's inquiry into the surveyor's office expanded to include an examination of the county clerk's records going back 15 years, which meant Dobbins in Harwick was now formally involved in something larger than any of them had anticipated when Evelyn had first stood at his counter asking for certified copies. Granger himself became quieter. This was, Marsh wrote in early November, not a good sign necessarily. It meant he was regrouping rather than retreating. And a man regrouping with Raymond Poole and 20 years of accumulated resources was not a man to underestimate. But the public silence also meant that the campaign of visible intimidation had been set aside, at least temporarily, which allowed the families of the valley to breathe without checking the horizon every morning. The Whelans stopped paying the invented water fee. When no legal action followed, 2 weeks passed, and then 4, and the silence from Granger Holdings on the matter was its own kind of answer. Margaret Crane rode the upper pasture in early October for the first time in 2 years, moving her flock through land the fraudulent grazing restriction had kept her from, and she sent Evelyn a short note describing it that was only 2 sentences long and didn't need to be longer. Evelyn kept it in the inside pocket of her coat, next to where the original list of 7 names had lived. But the hearing was set for the 2nd week of December in the state capital, a city neither Evelyn nor Cole had been to, which required 3 days of travel each way and arrangements for Lily that eventually settled on Martha Bellamy taking her for the week with a thoroughness that suggested Martha had been waiting to be useful in this specific way for some time. The night before they left, Lily was at the kitchen table doing her letters while Evelyn packed the traveling bag. Cole came in from the evening rounds and washed up and stood in the kitchen doorway watching the 2 of them for a moment before either of them noticed him. Lily was asking Evelyn how to spell something. Evelyn was spelling it letter by letter, slow enough for Lily to write it. And there was nothing remarkable about the scene except that he stood there watching it longer than he needed to, and his face in the lamplight had the open, uncontrolled expression that appeared when he had run out of guardedness. Lily looked up and saw him. "Papa, I can spell Evelyn now," she announced. "It has a Y in it that doesn't make sense." "Most things with a Y are like that," Cole said, coming to the table. "Evelyn says the Y is just the letter being contrary," Lily said. "That sounds right," Cole said. He sat down. He looked at Evelyn over Lily's head, and she looked back at him, and what passed between them had no name and didn't need one. "You'll be good for Martha?" Evelyn said to Lily. "I'm always good," Lily said, with the specific intonation of someone who is sometimes not. "You're usually good," Cole said. "That's the same thing," Lily said. "It is absolutely not," Cole said, and Lily giggled, and Evelyn went back to packing, and the evening settled around them like something ordinary, which it was, and which was the most valuable thing it could possibly be. The capital was cold in December, gray-skied and busy in a way that felt foreign after months of the ranch and Red Hollow's small rhythms. They stayed in a boarding house 2 streets from the courthouse that was clean and adequately heated and run by a woman who asked no questions, which Evelyn appreciated. Marsh met them the evening before the hearing and went over everything one more time at a table in the boarding house parlor. His papers spread around him in the organized way that was becoming familiar. He looked tired but focused, the look of a man who had put genuine work into something and was about to find out what it was worth. Poole will argue that the amendments were legitimate codicils, properly executed, Marsh said. He'll produce witnesses who will testify they saw the documents signed. I expect at least 2 of those witnesses to be Granger's own employees. Can he do that? Cole asked. He can put them on the stand, Marsh said. Whether the judge credits them against the documents examiner's physical finding is another question. The ink analysis doesn't lie. The paper age differential doesn't lie. Those are scientific findings, not testimony, and they're harder to argue against. He paused. The state attorney's inquiry is separate from this proceeding, but the judge is aware it's open. That matters for context, even if it can't be cited directly. Pittock, Evelyn said. Pittock has provided a signed statement to the state attorney's office, Marsh said. I've been made aware of its general contents, though it's not part of our case directly. It confirms the pattern we documented from the public records. Cole looked at the table. He admitted it, he said. He confirmed that he was asked to adjust boundary assessments on multiple occasions, and that the request came through Granger's office, Marsh said carefully. He framed it as pressure rather than instruction, which is how these things usually get framed when someone decides to talk. But yes. Cole was quiet. One more thing, Marsh said. He looked at them both. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the judge rules, this doesn't end cleanly. If we win on the fraud finding, Granger will appeal. That process takes time. The property will be legally protected during the appeal, but it will take another year at minimum to fully resolve. I want you to know that going in. I know, Evelyn said. Does that change anything? No, she said. It doesn't change anything. Marsh looked at Cole. No, Cole said. Marsh gathered his papers. Then get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow is a long day. But the courtroom was not what Evelyn had imagined, which was something grand and formal. It was a plain room with good windows and wooden benches, and a judge named Aldrich, who was older than she'd expected, past 60, with a dry, compressed quality that gave away nothing. Granger was there, seated beside Raymond Poole at a table across the aisle, dressed well, with the composed expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and knew how to look comfortable in them. He looked at Cole when they came in, and then at Evelyn, and the pale, steady eyes took her in with the same appraising quality they'd had in the yard that first day. The day she'd been behind the screen door watching, and he'd smiled at something he couldn't see. She met the look and held it and felt nothing particular about it except a kind of clean certainty, which was its own form of answer. The proceedings took most of the day. Poole was good, methodical, technically fluent, presenting Granger's case with the practiced confidence of someone who had won in rooms like this before. His witnesses testified to having seen documents signed, to the legitimacy of the amendments, to the validity of the business arrangements. They were credible in the way of people who had prepared carefully. Marsh was better. He laid the physical evidence out with the same methodical clarity Evelyn had watched him apply to everything. The document's examiner's report, the ink composition analysis, the paper age differential, the timeline of county registrations showing the 6 amendments all clustered in the same period, the certified copies from Harwick showing the pattern across multiple properties, the family statements. He put each piece down in order and let it sit, and then he showed how they connected. And the connection was a picture that had only one shape when you looked at it straight. Judge Aldrich asked questions throughout. Not many, but pointed ones. The kind that told you he had read everything before arriving and was verifying specific details rather than forming initial impressions. When he asked Marsh about the document's examiner's methodology, he used technical language that suggested he had looked into it independently. When he asked Poole about the clustering of amendments, Poole's answer was 4 sentences longer than it needed to be, which was its own kind of information. Granger testified briefly, late in the afternoon. He was composed and patient and answered everything in the reasonable tone of a man who found the accusations regrettable but was confident in his position. He did not look at Cole or Evelyn during his testimony. He looked at Aldrich, which was the correct strategic choice, and Evelyn noted it because it told her that whatever else Victor Granger was, he was not careless. But the ink was still the wrong age. The paper was still inconsistently weathered. The 6 amendments were still clustered in the same 6-month window, across 6 different families, each of them filed at a moment of vulnerability. None of Granger's careful composure changed those facts, because they were not the kind of facts that composure could reach. Judge Aldrich did not rule from the bench that day. He recessed and said he would issue a written ruling within 10 days. They rode back to the boarding house in the December dark, Marsh quiet beside them, and nobody said much because there was nothing to say that the waiting wouldn't answer. The ruling came in 8 days. Marsh telegraphed the morning it arrived, ruling in our favor. Fraud finding on amended deed, all encumbrances under fraudulent amendments voided, property interest claim dismissed with prejudice, full written ruling to follow. Well done. T. Marsh. Evelyn read the telegraph at the kitchen table, having come home 3 days earlier while Marsh handled the remaining paperwork. Cole was in the barn, the new barn, half-framed, smelling of fresh timber. She walked out to him with the telegraph in her hand and found him measuring a beam with Esteban Dorado, the two of them in the focused quiet of men doing precise work. She handed him the telegraph. He read it. His hands were still on the beam. He read it again. Esteban looked between them with the perceptive attention of a young man who understood something had happened. Cole set the telegraph down on the sawhorse beside him. He picked up the measuring tape and marked the beam and said to Esteban in an entirely level voice, "We're done for today. Take the afternoon." Esteban looked at the telegraph and then at Cole's face and then at Evelyn, and his own face broke into something unrestrained and delighted that he didn't bother to contain. "Yes, sir," he said, with the specific joy of someone celebrating something that isn't even his, but that feels like it is, and left. Cole looked at the half-built frame of the barn around him, the new timber, the raised walls, the sky open above where the roof would eventually be. Evelyn stood in the doorway and watched him. He was quiet for a long time. She let him be. "My father built the first one in the spring of 1863, he said. "Alone, mostly. He couldn't afford to hire anyone that year." "I know," she said. "This one..." He looked around at the frame. 8 families put labor into this. 9, counting the Dorados. "Yes." He turned and looked at her. His face was the open one, the one she'd stopped trying to brace herself for because there was no preparing for it. It was just him, without any of the protective mechanisms, which was a thing he offered rarely and which she understood was not easy for him. "We won," he said. "We won," she said. He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and put his arms around her and held on with the specific quality of someone who has been carrying something alone for so long that they have forgotten what it feels like to set it down, and have now set it down. And the relief of it is almost too large to hold. She put her arms around him and held back and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be better than the silence. They stood in the open frame of the new barn for a while, in the December light, with the smell of fresh timber and old ash and cold air around them. What followed the ruling was not an ending. Marsh had been honest about that, and it was true. Poole filed an appeal within 3 weeks, which was expected, and the appeal process began its slow navigation through the state courts with the particular patience that legal proceedings required. The property was protected during the appeal, legally secure, the fraudulent claims voided and on the record. But Granger was still there, still funded, still the largest landholder in the county, still the man with the pale eyes and the reasonable voice who had spent 20 years building something that did not come down in a single court ruling. He was diminished, though. That was real. The state attorney's inquiry moved forward through the winter and into the new year. And what it uncovered was not only Pittock's adjustments, but a broader pattern of cooperation between Granger Holdings and certain county officials that reached further back than anyone had documented. 2 county commissioners resigned. A third was removed. A state auditor came to Harwick and spent 3 weeks in the records office that Evelyn had once stood in asking Dobbins for certified copies. And when the auditor left, he took several boxes of documents with him. Dobbins kept his position. Evelyn thought that was right. The Whelans got a formal ruling that their water fee had been illegally assessed and were owed restitution. Margaret Crane's grazing restriction was vacated. The Bellamy Water Channel question was reopened for formal survey by a state-appointed examiner rather than anyone from Pittock's former office, and the results, when they came in the spring, put the channel exactly where Frank Bellamy had said it was for 11 years. Frank stood in his kitchen when Martha read him the survey results and said nothing for long enough that Martha thought something was wrong. Then he said, in the voice of a man selecting words very carefully, 11 years. Yes, Martha said. 11 years I didn't fight it because I didn't think fighting worked. Martha folded the survey letter. It works, she said, when you're not fighting alone. Frank looked at his wife. He had the look of a man who has been corrected by someone who is right and who is large enough to recognize it. It does, he said. Victor Granger did not go to prison. Evelyn had known that was unlikely and had made her peace with it. The law moved in the spaces it could reach, and there were spaces it couldn't, particularly when the man in question had money for lawyers and time to deploy it. What happened to Granger was slower and in some ways more thorough than prison. The appeal failed in the spring. The state court upheld Aldrich's ruling in full. Poole filed a second appeal, which was denied on the grounds that the physical evidence of document alteration was unimpeachable and had been properly verified by an independent examiner. With the legal protection gone, 3 families that had been quietly making their payments to Granger Holdings on fraudulent assessments stopped. When Granger moved to enforce, the state attorney's office intervened. He tried to sell 2 of his eastern properties and found that buyers were harder to come by than they'd been before Owen Ferris's piece had run in the Capitol papers. His county connections, which had been the infrastructure of his influence for 20 years, had been restructured around him by the commissioner resignations and the audit. He was not destroyed. He still had land and money and Raymond Poole on retainer. But he was smaller, and the smallness was public, and the specific power he had wielded, the power of a man no one would challenge because no one believed challenge worked, that was gone entirely. You could not get it back once people had seen it fail. Evelyn did not celebrate this. She was not built for that kind of satisfaction. What she felt when the second appeal was denied and Marsh wrote with the final confirmation was something quieter, a settling, the way a structure settled when the last load-bearing piece was properly in place. Not triumph, just the specific relief of something being finished. She told Cole at supper that evening, with Lily at the table eating with the focused intensity she brought to food she liked, and Cole read Marsh's letter and set it down and looked at his daughter and then at his wife and said nothing, which was the right response, which Evelyn had come to understand was often his best one. Lily looked up from her plate. "What is it?" "Good news," Cole said. "What kind?" "The kind that means things are going to be all right," he said. Lily considered this with the pragmatic attention she brought to most things. "Were things not all right before?" Cole looked at Evelyn. "Things were complicated," Evelyn said. "Now they're less complicated." Lily appeared to find this an adequate answer and returned to her food. Cole reached across the table and topped off Evelyn's coffee without asking, which was something he had started doing sometime in October, and which had become, without discussion, a thing he simply did. The new barn was finished in April, in a 2-day push that involved more people than the frame would reasonably hold at one time. Frank Bellamy brought lumber from his own stores. The Dorado family came with tools. Margaret Crane arrived with enough food to feed everyone for 2 days, which she set up in the yard without asking anyone, just organized it and started serving, with the quiet authority of a woman who had decided that standing with people was something you did with your hands as well as your name on a legal document. Lily supervised from the fence with the gray mare's nose on her shoulder, providing commentary on the construction that was mostly unhelpful, but delivered with such complete confidence that several of the men working nearest to her started actually consulting her. Esteban Dorado, who had been working for Cole through the winter and showed no signs of stopping, explained to her why a certain beam needed to go where it was going, and she told him he had it backwards. And after a moment, Esteban checked the plan and quietly adjusted it without saying anything about it. On the second evening, with the barn standing complete around them and the light going gold through the open doors, people stayed later than the work required. Someone had brought a fiddle and played badly, but with enthusiasm. Frank Bellamy, who had shown no previous indication of any sense of humor whatsoever, told a story about a mule that was so long and so specific and so apparently true that by the end of it, everyone was leaning on something for support. Cole stood near the barn door with a cup of something warm and watched his yard full of people, and Evelyn stood beside him because that was where she had ended up, naturally, without planning it, the way she ended up beside him in most situations now. "Your father would have liked this," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He would have talked to every single person here, Cole said. By the end of the night, he'd have known their whole histories. Is that a gift you didn't inherit? Apparently not. He drank from his cup. He'd have liked you. You said that before, she said, on the road from Harwick. I meant it then, he said. I mean it more now. She looked at the yard, at Margaret laughing at something the Bellamy woman had said, at Esteban crouched down talking to Lily about something with the serious attention of a young man who did not talk down to children, at Frank Bellamy telling what appeared to be a second mule story to an audience that had not yet learned its lesson. She thought about the woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in July with $14 and a bag of clothes and a name in her pocket that belonged to a dead man. She thought about how that woman had stood on the boardwalk in the afternoon heat and looked at the town that had not been waiting for her and had made a decision not out of courage, but out of the absence of any better option, had walked across a street and crouched down beside a child with a splinter, and just done the useful thing, because that was what she had. She had not arrived with a plan. She had not calculated her way into this life. She had been practical and stubborn, and she had paid attention, and she had refused to stop, and the life had assembled itself around those qualities the way a structure assembled around its load-bearing elements. Not designed exactly, but not accidental either. People talked about belonging as though it were something you were given, as though you arrived somewhere and either it was yours or it wasn't, and there was nothing to be done about it. She had believed that herself, once. She had spent most of her adult life in Cincinnati feeling like someone who was present in her own life without being native to it, capable, reliable, quietly wrong for the shape of the space she was in. What she understood now, in a way she hadn't before, was that belonging was not given. It was built. It was built the same way the barn was built, piece by piece, with the labor of many hands, on a foundation that had to be earned before it could hold anything. You built it by showing up when things were hard, by writing letters to lawyers and standing in county records offices and hauling water buckets at a fire and sitting with a child on a porch and letting her talk about her mother without flinching. By being useful, yes, but also by staying. By refusing to be pushed out or scared off or worn down into the kind of silence that powerful men depended on. She had not saved this ranch. That was not what had happened. Cole would have kept fighting on his own. She knew that about him, had known it since the morning he'd said, I'm not selling with the particular flatness of someone stating something that was not a position, but a fact about his nature. He would have kept fighting. He might even have won, eventually, in some diminished form. But they had built something together that neither of them would have built alone, and that thing had turned out to be larger than both of them. It had become the Bellamys and the Cranes and the Dorados and the Whelans and a young man named Esteban who showed up without being asked, and the county records and Theodore Marsh's careful compact handwriting and Owen Ferris's piece in the Capitol papers. It had become the whole valley, finally, speaking in the same direction at the same time. That was not something you planned. It was something you made possible by refusing to be quiet. Cole looked at her, looking at the yard. What are you thinking about? He said. Everything, she said. Nothing in particular. That's not an answer. I know. She looked at him. I was thinking about the stagecoach. He waited. When I stepped off and Harold Fitch wasn't there, she said, I stood on that boardwalk and I thought, this is the worst thing that has happened to me. And I was right at the time. It was. She looked back at the yard. I was also wrong about what it meant. What did you think it meant? That I had made a catastrophic mistake, she said. That being practical and willing and capable wasn't enough, and that I was going to end up somewhere worse than where I'd started. Cole was quiet. I was wrong about that, she said. You were wrong about that, he agreed. Lily detached herself from Esteban and crossed the yard at speed, and arrived between them with the force of a small weather event, tucking herself against Cole's side and reaching out to take Evelyn's hand with the completely natural gesture of a child who has sorted out where things belong and is comfortable with the arrangement. Cole put his arm around his daughter. Evelyn held Lily's hand. The fiddle started up again from somewhere across the yard, still bad, still enthusiastic. Frank Bellamy had begun what appeared to be a third mule story. The barn stood behind them, new and solid, smelling of timber and cut hay, built on the same ground as the one before it. The stars were coming out above the valley, cold and numerous. The same stars that had been over this land before Cole's father broke the first ground, before any of them had been here at all. They would be there long after. That was not a comfort exactly. The indifference of large things was not a comfort, but it was a perspective, and perspective was something. There were real things still ahead, the appeal's aftermath to navigate, the relationships with neighboring families to maintain, the slow work of a ranch through seasons that didn't care about court rulings and gave no credit for what you'd been through. Cole still had mornings when the closed room in him was more closed than others. Evelyn still had nights when she lay awake running through things, looking for the piece she'd missed, the angle she hadn't considered. Lily still put her shoes on the wrong feet more often than probability suggested was accidental. None of it was resolved into something clean. Life on the frontier was not clean. It was dry summers and hard winters and fences that needed fixing and animals that got sick at inconvenient times and people who were difficult and money that was never quite enough and the daily labor of keeping things together with insufficient rest. The difference was that none of it had to be carried alone. That was everything. That was in the end the only thing that had ever actually mattered. The woman who had arrived with nothing had built something. Not because she was exceptional, she knew she was not, but because she had looked at what was in front of her and done the useful thing, and then done the next useful thing, and had refused at every point to mistake isolation for strength. She had come to Red Hollow because a man had written her kind letters, and she had decided that was enough to build something on. The man was gone before she arrived. What she had found instead was a child with a splinter and a grief-hollowed rancher who kept his heart in a closed room and a valley full of people who had been quiet long enough that they had forgotten how to stop. She had not saved them. They had, in the end, saved themselves. But they had done it together, which was the only way it worked, which was the thing that fear and isolation were specifically designed to prevent you from remembering. Cole's hand found hers in the dark, beside Lily's small warm one, and the three of them stood together in the yard of the Dawson Ranch under the cold December stars, with the fiddle playing badly and Frank Bellamy somewhere in the middle of a story that showed no signs of ending, and the new barn standing solid at their backs. It was not perfect. It was not easy. It was not the life any of them had planned. It was without question enough.